Brendan D. Murphy is the consciousness guy, host of the popular Truthiverse podcast, and author of the critically acclaimed epic, The Grand Illusion, a synthesis of science and spirituality, book 1. And you're working on book 2 right now?
Finishing it off.
Finishing off book 2. He's also the founder of the Truthiversity, the #1 consciousness-raising university for awakening minds at truthiversity.com. You can also find that in the show notes. And facilitator of accelerated evolution inside his Evolve Yourself program. You can also find that in the show notes. And you can become a Truthiversity member for unrestricted access to all of his cutting-edge premium content. So I was trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to discuss with you today, and your book is a perfect representation of you in that it's incredible, but it's also so dense, and there are so many topics that you just cover in volume 1 and you're working on volume 2 that it's so hard to distill it down into specific topics to cover. But one of those topics I would like to cover today, very fitting, I wore a hat that says swimming in ether for those who are listening on audio. So that's something that I'd like to discuss at some point. But I want to start with, actually, because I don't know this, your journey of waking up, so to speak, because it started for you at a relatively young age. Like, you've been doing this for a while. You said you were friends with Eileen McCusick now for like 12 years or something like that.
Yeah, I've been doing this for 20 years now that you mention it.
That is crazy. And you're 40.
Yep.
Okay, so you've been doing it since you were 20 years old. Dude, what I was doing when I was 20 years old, oh my God.
It was interesting because I still did like the 20-year-old stuff with my mates, but you just can't have certain conversations.
Yeah, got you. So, yeah.
So the backstory.
Yeah, the backstory of your waking up, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can kind of credit my brother, I guess, in a way, because he was still at school at the time I was out of school. And I was on the way to turning 20. He came home from school one day and he was like, hey, we had this like young entrepreneur guy. He came in to give us a talk about business, but he kept going off topic and talking about this book that like blew him away. And this book was called The Holographic Universe. And, you know, it's quite well known in our circles, right? So by the late Michael Talbot. And he was a physicist and also interested in the paranormal, mystical sort of side of things. So that book, I finally, like 6 months after my brother mentioned it, I knew it just stayed in the back of my mind. I knew it was important. And it was one of those absolute, like, you know, Hollywood kind of like turning point moments, you know. It's like, that was the point where my life went off in this other tangent, right? And never looked back. So I read the book finally, and it just absolutely destroyed what my ideas of reality and possibility had been up to that point. And so that was where that was like my awakening kind of moment. And I just became absolutely, I guess, obsessed with pursuing that path. You know, what is the nature of reality? What is the nature of consciousness? You know, what's it all about? What are we doing here? This kind of thing. So that was it. I went off on that tangent. From there, it was impossible for me to kind of like fit into the normal world. Like I never got a full-time job. I never worked the 9 to 5. I've never done that. Never had a mortgage.
So you have no clue what that looks like.
I just don't know what that world is, man. And that's
great.
And yeah, like my partner Amy keeps reminding me every now and then how weird that is and how like I'm such a freak in a way because of that. And
that's why you look like you're 20 years old and you're 40. It makes sense. You didn't have to undo all of that trauma. I'm sure you've had to undo some traumatic experiences in your life, but you didn't have to undo all the conditioning and trauma.
And it wasn't being siphoned. My life was siphoned every day. Right. So yeah, so that was it. Like that was why that book came to exist, because 4 years after my, you know, reading of Talbot's book, I've started putting what was eventually that. I started writing. I didn't know what I was putting together. At first I thought it'd be like one of those kind of like big like David Icke books where you just talk about everything and just throw it all together into the melting pot and just, but in the end I spent so long on it and I got more and more clear gradually as to what to focus on first. Instead of doing everything, it just became this like investigation into like the roots of reality. So that was kind of what that is. And then book 2 is actually technically the second half of this book. So,
how many pages is this first one?
I think it's at 665.
Oh my goodness, man.
Yeah. So I don't know. I like to cover things thoroughly, and I like people to get as much information as I could possibly give them. And like, I'm a perspective builder. That's kind of what my thing is. And I notice that a lot of what's out there doesn't give people a perspective. Like it's like a sound bite or a data point, but what does it mean if you connect it with other data points and then have a meta level perspective on it.
Yeah.
And so that's what I try to do as well as getting into the nitty gritty detail of
that makes sense. But those nitty gritty details all flow back to this central overarching perspective on the nature of reality.
Theoretic. That's what I tell myself.
Okay, got it. In theory, that's what you want the reader to get out of it. So if you had to summarize book one, the one that's here in front of us, in a couple sentences, how would you summarize it?
Well, 12 years after publishing it, I don't think I've managed to do that. But yeah, it's an investigation into the nature of reality and consciousness. And, I asked those two questions. They're my two foremost questions. And it's like, if you ask one of them, you can pick reality or consciousness. You're actually asking the same thing. So I'm showing you through a mystical pathway, if you like, and an esoteric pathway and a scientific pathway, how all these different paths converge to the same point, essentially, as far as the nature of reality, who and what we are, consciousness, all that stuff. Wow.
Incredible. So one of the topics I had mentioned before that I want to get into, and there's several, again, it was kind of hard to narrow it down with you, is the afterlife, especially because from my understanding, that's what you're focusing on quite a bit in book 2. And I want to get into some things like this idea that there's a reincarnation trap. I want to discuss reincarnation itself, after death experiences, near death experiences, things like this. So yeah, wherever you want to start on your investigation into the afterlife. I know that's a big starting point, but where do you think is best to start?
That's a great question. Where would you start if you were inquiring?
Do you think that afterlife itself is an irrefutable fact? That's a tough one because you bring in, I just interviewed Dr. Jordan Grant. He would be like, you can't know anything except for that you exist. But okay, I guess, would you say, do you have a very, very strong feeling? You could say you've looked into it empirically, rationally, and intuitively that there is an afterlife.
I think the issue there is the afterlife term itself is so loaded.
Right.
So because everyone hears that and they have their own ideas of what that looks like or what it doesn't look like, they think that the question really is, can your consciousness continue past the point where your physical body stops working?
Right.
The answer is unequivocally yes.
Okay.
Now, and thousands and millions of people around the world know that because they've directly experienced the cessation of their body working and then conscious existence continuing, which is, the near-death experience or, mystical experiences where people access information or remote viewing where people access information that they theoretically, according to the materialist paradigm, shouldn't have access to, but they can do it anyway. And it's like, well, they're bypassing the ordinary 5 sense, Newtonian kind of mechanism. So something else, obviously consciousness is not restricted to the skull. It's not inside your brain. It's not generated by the brain. It really actually has nothing to do with the brain other than being temporarily associated with it for however long your body is, working in tandem with your consciousness. And then when the body finally gives out, stops working, consciousness continues on. And we've approached that from dozens of different angles. I've approached it from as many as I could humanly, conjure up. And the answer is yes from every angle. It's like consciousness is the root of reality, and you can't extinguish that because it has nothing to do with space and time. So it doesn't begin, it doesn't end.
Do you think that, let me ask this actually, what are the most compelling near-death experience stories that you've come across?
There's a lot.
Yeah, I figured.
Okay, so one of the guys' names was a Russian name.
Don't worry about the name. We can fill it in afterwards.
Bit, so it'll come to me, I think. Okay. Him, and also I wanted to mention Mel and Thomas Benedict, who had an extensive ND. I've read hundreds and hundreds of them, so I've just got too many. But the Russian guy, Yuri, I think his name was, he died and he was dead for 3 days, like biologically dead for 3 days. He was pronounced dead. They put his body into the freezer, the fridge in the morgue. And then when they brought him out, the guy, the surgeon doing the post-mortem investigation, sliced into his chest, and it started bleeding. And he freaked out. And then, so this whole saga, and they brought him back to life one way or another. He was revived, and he had perceptions and, essentially he had conscious experience while he was in the fridge, dead. Wow. While his body was dead, he visited other parts of the nearby hospital where there was, he saw a bunch of stuff, right? Because there was 3 days, right? So he's having experiences. But one of the things he saw was a child who had been in pain and crying a lot, and the nurses and the staff in the hospital couldn't figure out why. But with his, I'll just call it for convenience, his astral out-of-body perception, he saw that there was actually a broken bone that had gone missed, undiagnosed, and that was why the kid was so upset and crying. So when he came to, he told the nurses, like, this is the problem with the kid. He's got a broken bone. You've got to go and deal with this. And they went and checked, and sure enough, the kid had a broken bone, and it was where he said it was, and all this stuff.
And there's other near-death experience cases of someone verifying something that they could not have possibly known.
There's
one,
hundreds.
given that they were, quote, dead at the time or incapacitated. But even if they were alive, it's something that's an intimate detail or a detail that they just could not have known about someone else somewhere else.
It's not even debatable. There's so many of them. It's a joke. And it's profound when you see them. Like one of them was a guy who had a car accident, and someone pulled over on the side of the road in a truck, a family business, and on the side of the truck was this, the branding and the name of the business. And so he's there. His body is essentially dead on the ground because he's got head trauma and stuff. He's floating, watching the scene unfold, and people coming to his aid, and this woman gets out of this truck, and she helps, and she gets involved trying to call an ambulance or whatever. She helps him out in this situation with the resuscitation or whatever it was. But basically, he notices the information on the side of the truck, and later on, after he's been through the hospital recovery and all this, he's still got the image of the truck and the information, and he's stored that. And he went and looked it up and tracked down this woman who, when he opened the door, when she opened the door to him, he went to her house, and she opened the door, and they were like, "Oh my God, it's you!" Like, but he shouldn't have known that she even existed because he was dead on the side of the road. But he actually had the information from his out of body perspective to track down the family business and find this woman and go to her home, and they had this amazing, moving reunion. Like the list goes on. People find out about a dead sibling they never knew existed while they're physically dead in the out-of-body, whatever you want to call it, realm, the astral realm, this in-between state where
they meet a family member that they didn't know about.
Exactly. And there's dozens and dozens of examples, man. It just goes on and on. And it's like the parents are like, oh my God, like we didn't tell our child that we'd lost the baby,
Right. They
weren't supposed to know they had an older brother or sister, So yeah, it goes on and on. It's extensive.
What do you think about the various examples of people having a near-death experience and claiming to meet Christ or meet Muhammad or meet some other figure for their specific religious orientation, and then coming back and saying that, some people in the afterlife say they experienced hell because they were not following Christ the way that they were supposed to. But then I've interviewed myself, this guy named Vinnie Tolman, who was a Mormon, which is like a weird quasi subset of Christianity, that was a devout Mormon until his near-death experience. And then he still would consider himself a Mormon now, but he says very candidly that in heaven, in the afterworlds, in the astral realms, whatever you want to call it, there is people of all religious orientations, all backgrounds, and hell is not a fixed place. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually like the near-death connection is a huge can of worms. I wouldn't be able to do it justice talking about it, but in writing, yes, much more so.
Yeah, in your book, in part 2 of your book.
Because it needs to be pulled apart and looked at and dissected, but the afterlife stuff that you mentioned, like people going into these other realms, like that has been verified by lots of different people who have no religious affiliation or beliefs or what have you. Like Robert Monroe is a classic example. He went and he explored these places where he found religious groups of certain types were essentially, they create a virtual reality environment. And so this is all what we would call the astral planes. I call it the astral planes for convenience because that's an esoteric term.
Do you think it's a creation of their conscious or co-creative capacity, like their ability to consciously create aspects of their own reality?
It is.
That's what I thought too. I've always thought that. Yeah, it
is. And, it's obvious if you dig into it and look at it and think about it enough, it's obvious that we create an environment. Because again, it's consciousness operating without the body. The body's gone. So what is the limit on consciousness? Well, I mean, in principle, there aren't a whole lot of limits. So you're in an environment that consists entirely of the matrix of consciousness. So it's a virtual reality environment that you can shape. Every thought has a creative effect on the environment around you. And you're interconnected with everything. So yeah, do you have something you want to
No,
move to?
I was saying keep going because I want to pull up this one of the things from your book that this tied to. It was the Bill and Carol that had shared hallucinations, because it ties into that. Because correct me if I'm wrong, it was that, and Brendan brilliantly covers this in his book, and we'll throw the book in the show notes too. Highly recommend checking it out. But it's in chapter 6 discussing the ether, and I think it was that Bill had constructed this virtual reality of some sorts, this like parallel reality in his mind, I think, and then would invite Carol. And you explain it.
Yeah, that was in book 1.
Yeah, it was in book 1.
Jesus Christ!
You wrote to his credit, he wrote this in 2012, right?
It published in 2012. Yeah,
published in so it's been a while.
Like I was 29. That was a long time ago.
It's been a while.
But yeah, so I'm actually, there's something very similar that I've got in book 2. A very similar situation where, and was it Anne and Bill? A and B?
Yeah,
right?
Bill and Carol. That's
Bill and Carol. Okay, so sorry. There's a very similar story in book 2, which is very connected to that. It might even be, it sounds like it might be the same thing, but I'm telling it again, possibly, and just fleshing it out a little bit, because in book 1, I don't think I went into it that much, but these 2 people got involved in a hypnosis experiment where one of them was inducted into a hypnotic trance, and the other one would then hypnotize the other one into a hypnotic trance. And then, but this is being overseen by an overseer who has obviously the hypnotic skills and background himself. So he's watching this unfold, and he's inducting them into the same reality. So he gives them both the same kind of instructions and tells them what to do. And they are experiencing, as revealed by the notes that were made and the notes that were exchanged after the fact, they were experiencing the same shared reality. And there was a point in the experiment where they stopped talking to each other. And I'm not sure if I'm actually telling the book 1 thing or the book 2.
And it might have been in one of your articles, actually. I don't know for sure.
Okay,
so it might have been one. Sorry, I probably confused you. Like, wait, I covered that in book 1?
I know what you're talking about now. But the thing is, there was stuff like that, I think, in book 1. And anyway, so you're right. It was an article, which is in book 2. So that then became a point of weirdness where suddenly it goes quiet and they're not talking to each other anymore. He found out after the fact, and this experiment was run by Charles Tart, if memory serves me correctly. You can check the notes for that. But he was wondering why they weren't talking to each other anymore, and what he found out
in this constructed reality.
While they're in the hypnosis
so they had been
session.
Interacting with each other in this construct.
Yeah, and giving him verbal feedback and whatnot. But then they stopped talking, and the upshot of it was that they didn't need to verbalize anymore, because they were in this shared, like, telepathic reality, this virtual world together. Experiencing whatever they were experiencing, right? These different environments, and walking on the beach, or going and swimming in the water, which was like champagne and what have you. It goes on. There's other aspects to this story. And then at one point, a third person accidentally walked into the room while the experiment was going on, and she got incorporated into their virtual world experience, and she was sharing their experience. And there was a point where he told her, this is all happening telepathically, right? Just mentally in their virtual world, to not enter into, because it was his space. The male had claimed the space, and there was like a tunnel leading into a cave, and the center of the cave was something precious he didn't want anyone to see. And he told,
sounds like Inception. Literally sounds like the plot to Inception.
It's a very Inception scenario. And so she's like, well, okay, I'll wait here at the entrance to the cave, because he's telling me not to go in. And this is all established like after the fact, that these 3 people have all had the same experience in this virtual reality. And meanwhile, like the guy running the experiment doesn't know what's going on unless somebody volunteers something verbally. But they all had the same shared experience. And later on, there was a second part to it, where the other female participant, who was actually supposed to be in it, went back into this guy's cave and made it all the way to the room that she wasn't supposed to, the sort of sacred room. And there was, she encountered an old man type figure, like a wisdom figure, who was, it was not overly welcoming to her. So it was like some very deep recess in this guy's psyche. So
it was some subconscious thing or something.
She was in his subconscious. Yes,
that's probably why he wanted to guard certain parts of reality that was constructed. He's like, I don't want people to see what's in my subconscious.
Totally, it was a very interesting story.
It literally sounds like Inception.
It was a very Inception experience. And what made it really interesting, or even more interesting, because it was interesting anyway, but was this other third party who wasn't supposed to be in the room, but walked in and intruded, but got incorporated into the virtual reality and was able to verify that they were having this experience. So there's 3 people sharing it. It's like, well, you know, how are you going to, is that coincidence? It's obviously something a little bit more than that.
Right, right. Especially with all these other stories of near-death experience and shared what you could call, I guess, quote, hallucinations. But I want to get into more of that in a minute. I want to go circle back to just the afterlife in general. What are your thoughts on reincarnation? And I'll preface this with where I'm at right now,
cool,
if you don't mind.
That's actually useful.
Yeah. So I think it's either that we do absolutely reincarnate, and I think there's strong indications of that both in, you know, yogic traditions, other Eastern traditions, but also because there are countless examples of people being able to recall past experiences, even kids, you know, born in Japan, recalling specific information about some man in England that they used to be, et cetera, et cetera. And there are countless examples of this. But it's either that is an indication of past lives that we each remember, or, and it could be an and or situation, it's someone unknowingly tapping into what many would call the Akashic records, or just what I would call the ether, the information field that is all present around us, which I think, you know, can explain a lot of psychic phenomena, and we'll get into that later, hopefully. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. That it's either someone unknowingly, and they already have this idea that they've reincarnated, but they're conflating that with just tapping into specific information related to someone that is stored in the Akasha, or they're actually talking about their past lives. And then the other thing that sort of folds into both of these perspectives is a minor difference in perspective on the nature of consciousness itself, in that some would say we are quite literally one being modulating itself in an infinite number of unique ways, so that when this aspect of consciousness that I am is done in this reality, I just fall back into the hole and I'm literally just that. But then there's also sort of this spider web-like fashion where we're individuated portions that are individual souls that come into this lifetime, but we are inextricably linked to and still a creation of and an aspect of a creator that is more powerful, all-knowing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I just spit a lot at you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that.
Well, my answer can be really short.
Okay. Okay.
Because all of that is simultaneously true.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's basically what it boils down to. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to do the reincarnation, like to take that angle and to look at the research that's been done on it. You know, the pioneer was Professor Ian Stevenson, and he spent 40 years or more traveling thousands of miles per year all around the world to investigate case by case these primarily children who were reporting information from somebody else's life as their own, going, you know, like getting emotional about some random family, you know, in the next village, that their family members can't understand what's going on. Why do they feel attached to, you know, and why are they calling this strange woman auntie when we've never met them, this kind of thing. But yeah, he went through it and used the closest, you know, approximation of the scientific method that was humanly possible to investigate reincarnation cases like that. And he was, you know, just what he did was unbelievable. I mean, he basically single-handedly used scientific method to prove, as far as you can prove it, like as far as is possible to, that reincarnation happens in our linear frame of reference, like if that makes sense. So that's... What
were some of the most compelling things that he came across?
Oh, man.
I know I'm putting you on the spot and we're calling up a lot of stuff, so I'm sorry.
It's cool. One of the things he found was a correlation between somebody's birthmarks and the previous personality's wounds.
Yeah.
So where they were killed by a bullet or a spear or an arrow was typically, or very frequently, where the exact same spot would be a birthmark in the next body, you know, speaking in a linear sense. So the birthmark correlation was one of the major things that he found. beyond that, I mean, on a physical level, off the top of my head, that's really the main thing that stands out to me on putting me on the spot. But he was so methodical and careful. Like, he rejected cases if they didn't stack up. He wasn't looking to prove it. He was looking to test it. And that was his mentality. And he succeeded as far as the scientific method and being logical and rational in approaching to that subject. He succeeded spectacularly. So other people have followed in his line of work and elaborated on that hugely. And what he also found was typically, very frequently, I'll say, instead of typically, I'll say very, very frequently, these kids, it was usually a kid or someone fairly young who died, and then they would rapidly reincarnate into a family quite close by. So usually in a village not that far away, somewhere in the same state or country. And they would come back with very active, it's like they still had the old mind, the other person's mind. And that would gradually fade away over time. But, you know, he found that reincarnation memories generally, once a child hit the age of around 5, it would start to kind of fade into the background and they'd lose it a bit. So that was where he got a lot of his most compelling information. And these kids were able to provide like very detailed information about families they should have known nothing about, and had a very profound emotional connection to them. And some of these families, when they got to meet them, they were like, oh my God, like this is the child we lost, or this is, you know, it's legit. Like the connection, the emotional connection is there. And so to me, that kind of, if you look at it in that way, and, you know, you incorporate the esoteric information that is usually overlooked and neglected in this subject, you know, you get people like Irvin Laszlo writing about the Akashic field and all this kind of stuff, and they usually, I'm not saying it's intentional, but maybe inadvertently, kind of minimize the personal meaning and significance of these connections. And he tends to, from what I've seen, lean into it's just someone picking up information from the field. And that's like,
which is still cool, but it's like, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's kind of reducing the situation. Like, we have this amazing sort of topography psychologically, you know, psychically, and he's reducing it to like a flatland. Yeah. Which, you know, not knocking him because he's done good work, but I don't like it's a kind of a reductionist approach, just in disguise. Like, now we just reduce it to the quantum field, and it's impersonal, it's meaningless, it doesn't, spiritless. Yeah, it's totally soulless. Yeah. But if you've done your esoteric homework, you realize there are many aspects to a human being, many aspects to consciousness and to the mind. Yeah. So it's not like it's not a simple thing. No. And then we can introduce the idea of, okay, so what is it that correlates the two personalities through space and time when we know that there is no time? Like, this whole linear thing of time passing is an illusion. We get that, we understand it, we acknowledge it. So what is it how is this personality from, you know, 1950s correlated with this one in the 1920s when we don't believe in reincarnation because that's a linear explanation because time doesn't exist? And then you talk about, well, okay, so esoterically we have, you know, the monad, and then the monad, you know, without getting too much into it, the monad is kind of like, it's almost like you have, actually, let me start with the Atman, what they call the Atman. Or this is the spark of the divine. So this is like, if you can touch the atmic level of self, you are immediately infinite. You're in touch with everything. You are vast beyond vastness. And so then you have, from the esoteric theory perspective, the Atman, the spark of the divinity, sheathes itself in the finest, most tenuous form of matter that exists, right? And then this sheath we call the monad. The monad then repeats the process at a more dense level, and we call that the causal body. And then the causal body repeats this on the mental plane, and we call that the mental body, and so on, and into the astral and the astral body. So there's all these different layers, and that's not even that's a nutshell version of it, right? So what happens is that a lot of these people disregard all of this stuff, and it's actually worth digging into to flesh out a fuller perspective, because if you look at the kind of esoteric traditions, the ancient kind of wisdom traditions, there's a lot there that has value and validity that people aren't talking about. And I've made a point of, you know, investigating and testing it as much as I can in certain, because it's vast, but picking certain things and testing and seeing, well, does this make sense? And how does this connect to the guy who was, you know, having an out-of-body experience in 2017, who went to a hell realm, and he didn't know anything about ancient Buddhism or ancient, you know, the ancient Hindu philosophies, but he's just verified it and he doesn't even realize, you know, this kind of stuff. So it's much more interesting than just, oh, we just tapped into the impersonal ether, Akashic records, whatever. There's an identity principle or identity particle or an identity aggregate or whatever you want to call it. There's something that binds the lower level expressions in time and space and correlates them in a quantum non-local way. Hopefully that's making sense. And even Amit Goswami, the retired physicist, acknowledges that level of it, like the quantum correlation through time, and he acknowledges the reincarnation side of it. But I just want to fill in some of the gaps and flesh it out a little.
Yeah, well, you're filling them in really well. That's good.
Thanks, sir.
So from a sort of fundamentalist religious perspective, they would listen to what you're saying and some would say, oh, that's all like Luciferian trickery nonsense. And then others would lend credence to the idea that they're just picking up on some information, or this can all be explained by kids being told stories and having ideas imprinted in their mind. I don't necessarily want to entertain those because those are just absurd to me, given how much, I guess you could say, strong correlative evidence there is for both reincarnation and, just this idea that people have had near-death experiences and experienced what we would call the quote afterlife, or just the continuation of being, rather. But I want to talk about religion itself, and I want to speak specifically to Christianity and what you think of the figure that was Christ. So I know that's a huge topic, and we're like going to gloss over as many topics as we can. But I know you've been researching this quite a bit lately too. Just your perspective on Christ, because some will say that this story of God coming into flesh, born of a virgin, has been told time and time again over time. Therefore, Jesus probably never actually existed, or Yeshua never actually existed. And then the full other end of the spectrum is, of course, the fundamentalist Christian would say Christ is the only way. If you don't confess for your sins and profess that Christ is your Lord and Savior, then you're going to hell for eternity. Where do you fall in that spectrum based on your research?
I don't know where to start with that. I used to be a Christian as a kid. You know,
really? I did too. So
you were telling me that you had that background as well.
Yeah.
So I had some indoctrination as a little kid. I remember there was maybe a year or two in like primary school for us, like grade 3. I remember there was someone who would come in like once a week, and we'd have like what I think that they called it scripture class or something. And I just think it's to hit kids with that before they have developed an analytical mind, a rational mind, and it's one of those things. Like, there's always seeds of truth. There's always seeds of validity. Yeah. Even if it's swimming in an ocean of garbage, there's going to be something there. Like there is in all the Abrahamic religions. Even the Christians, like the born-again Christians, have a tendency to be extraordinarily, I'll try to be not too much of a dick about this, but they have a tendency, a lot of them, to be extremely simplistic, like to the point of absurdity, to the point where you can't engage. They've actually abandoned, what I've noticed is there's a significant, say, portion of that population who has abandoned logic, reason, evidence, and also abandoned themselves in the process, because those things, for a start, are part of who and what we are. So abandoning that is self-abandonment to begin with, but they go further than that and fixate on the external personality, the idea of Jesus, and any form, I will say, any form of personality worship is, especially in the realm of nature of reality, your fate, your destiny, theology, eschatology. That's a bad idea. That's you are abandoning yourself at such a fundamental level, and that simply isn't how reality works. It's not. I mean, I don't want to sound conceited, but I have spent the last 20 years, like at a pathological level, investigating what's going on. How does this work? Does this make any sense? And, much more than even most of the other people who are publishing books about it, right? Because that's what I'm here for. And it just, no matter which way you pull it apart, it doesn't stack up. When you have access to altered states of consciousness, just sitting in meditation, then you can get out of the rational, concrete mind, so-called rational. Like most people don't even know how to use the rational mind yet. Apparently, according to theosophy and some of these ancient esoteric traditions, we are in an age or a round of humanity's development where we are actually mastering or have mastered, say, the emotional body. So this is an emotional body experience, this eon that we're in. So the rational experience hasn't even arrived yet.
Wow.
And I look around and I agree with that assessment.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
we have not even come close to mastering intellect. And in the esoteric realm, intellect means something far, far beyond just normal like intellect. Like we're not talking about knowing your times tables or
no, we're talking about an inner knowing.
It's so far beyond anything that people are used to talking about or thinking about. And when you can access altered consciousness, expanded or deeper consciousness, as I know you have, then you're outside of the lower mind, the lower manas. And that lower mind is what gets programmed. That lower mind is what gets brainwashed. That is what gets indoctrinated. That's what identifies with the physical body as the self. It's what thinks, oh, I am just the things that I like. I'm my preferences and my tastes and my predilections. I'm my friends and my family. I'm the music that I like. I'm my physical body. And that's it. Like, and so there's no bigger picture to it. And the Christians, and I had this myself as a young fellow, like I had this, we have this weird space that we exist in where we've got the scientific worldview that we're all kind of born into, so-called scientific, right? And the Western materialist paradigm. Right. And then at the same time, then you've got this Christian legacy program that runs in the background, and for some people it's not background, it's like the foreground and everything to them. But neither of them give you any answers to anything, neither of them touch anything eternal or beyond the lower mind. Like science, the realm of science is absolutely about lower mind, intellect, but limited intellect, material, because it's encumbered by materialism. Yes. So it can't go beyond that. Yeah. And then on the other side of the spectrum, and these two camps are supposed to be at war with one another, they actually have a lot in common. So the fundamentalists are also in the lower mind, but they just use it in a different way, and they adopt a different worldview that is supposedly antagonistic or whatever, but they are stuck in the realm of ideas, my personality, and as long as any individual stays in that realm and doesn't penetrate deeper into the nature of themselves, which is the nature of reality, then they're going to fall prey to this kind of very small vision, small picture thinking. So like the Jesus can of worms is just so massive that, we'll never do it justice.
Do you think he was a real figure though?
I think what you have is you have actual historical figures who have been turned into something and inflated and blown up. And even if, and Jesus, there are quotes in the Bible, all these things you shall do yourselves, that's a very powerful statement coming from God him in the flesh, God in the flesh, like said, you will do these same things he's doing. Right. So what does that tell you? Like, what are we doing here then obsessing with a personality that supposedly existed historically? It doesn't, anybody who doesn't matter where you look in the literature here and now in the 21st century, who has penetrated beyond the lower mind, the rational mind, the alpha state that we tend to exist in, alpha beta states that we're existing in now, having this conversation, anyone who's gone past that knows that to any significant depth, knows that historical figures, personalities don't matter. It's not important. I mean, it is interesting to talk about, like, okay, did Jesus, what was he like? Because there's historical evidence that there was somebody who this mythology has been based around, but it was actually multiple people. It's not just one. And as you pointed out, if you get into the sort of more supernatural mythological aspect of it, then you're talking about dozens and dozens of,
Yeah, there's examples in Egypt, there's examples in Greece of the exact same story. And one thing that I've thought of on that line of questioning is the possibility that is how avatars, if you will, come into this reality, that it's not necessarily a fictitious story or allegory that's told. That's also a possibility, but it could be that that's literally how these higher spiritual beings, more evolved spiritual beings that come to Earth for a specific purpose at a specific point in time every 1,000, 2,000 years or something like this, actually enter into this reality. I've thought about that possibility. Have you?
Yeah. And that's absolutely possible. Again, like the point then you have to ask, well, what was the point of them doing that? If that happens, let's say for the sake of argument, that happens, the Buddha, you pick any remarkable historical figure. What were they doing here? What was the purpose of it? Because it's never random. It's not a random thing. It's not chance. So what is that? What was their job? What was their mission? And, you know, there's a dispensation of some kind of wisdom that they have left for people for the sake of trying to raise humans up. And unfortunately, in the case of, you know, religion, so often it has the opposite effect. They fixate on the supposed historical figure and they lose the point of the message that they left. And now they're turning the message into this fixed theological doctrine that has little connection to reality whatsoever, and actually takes them outside of themselves, fixating on this figure that they are inflating. So it's this process of inflating this other figure, like big God, little me, like this amazing savior avatar, incredible. I'm just such a worm in the dirt. I will never I can't even, like, I just need Jesus to save me. I'm just such filth. You know? And it's actually really it's damaging, because that is fraudulent, and that is a fraudulent spiritual teaching. It is wrong on every level, and that is not the point of the teachings that this Jesus character, if you look at the words he was made to say or quoted as saying, right, that's the opposite of the message that he was leaving. And it's obvious if you look at the key parts of the Jesus, you know, story mythology. It's obvious that he is representative of something. He represents and symbolizes something. And, you know, it's true that Jesus is God incarnate in the flesh, but it's not, the purpose of that is to understand what humanity is, because that's what he represents. He's the human being, man, the archetypal man, God manifesting as humanity. And we're supposed to use his teachings to recognize that we are actually not separate from the creator, and we're not separate from the source. That was actually, he made it abundantly clear, if you're paying attention to anything he said, we are the same in essence. The only difference is, like, you know, you can be the same in essence as your 3-year-old daughter, but that doesn't mean your 3-year-old daughter has the same body of knowledge that you do, or the same wisdom or perspective. So you have someone who, for the sake of argument, if they existed, came into the historical illusion of the space-time matrix to spark some kind of remembrance or learning that would raise people up and help them to actually be empowered. And unfortunately, it's been twisted and inverted to the point where people use it to disempower themselves and go, oh, well, I just have to wait till Jesus saves me because, you know, I'm just so pathetic. I was born into original sin, you know, another scam. You know, salvationist religion is a huge, huge spiritual fraud, and it's really mangled a lot of people's psyches.
Yeah, and you see common threads of that also in the New Age, though, with perpetually waiting for, like, the Arcturians or the whatever supposed extraterrestrial race to come back and save them, and the point that humanity is going to ascend here soon, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll probably touch on that a little bit. But I want to circle back to more fundamentalism, fundamental religious concepts, especially related to hell. I know we touched on it briefly earlier, but are you of the opinion that in most cases, even with these near-death experiences of people experiencing hell, it's that when they come back to Earth or come back to this seemingly physical reality after their near-death experience, that they are trying to make sense of what they saw based on their own conditioning, and that what they saw was also a product of their own conditioning. What I mean by that specifically is that, let's say a case where a guy experiences hell, and he's experiencing that from the perspective of someone who is a strong Christian that has so much shame themselves. So they fundamentally believe that they are not good enough to be saved, so that they are going to hell. So that's what they experience. And maybe that's at a conscious level, maybe it's at a subconscious level, I don't know. But so they create that experience in the afterlife to some degree, but then also come back, and when they're relaying the information to the rest of the world, they're filtering it through the lens of the religious information that they've been exposed to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the unfortunate things about people having only the scientific worldview versus the sort of exoteric religious worldview, because they come back from an experience like that and it doesn't fit into any of the established categories.
Right.
So what do? They have to fit the round peg in the square hole and try to shove it into, oh, well, you know, heaven and hell and the theology. And it doesn't really, you know, we can explain that, but it's not yeah, it's not helpful. So, okay, where do we go from there? So there is a level of conditioning, and you can see it. Unfortunately, people they need a reference point to be able to talk about a non-physical experience in a completely different realm, an other realm. And so, unfortunately, if the only framework they have is that they've been exposed to Christianity at some point in their life, then they have to talk about it in that way. A lot of people have, we know there are famous cases of atheists who've had near-death experiences, and they come back and, unfortunately, it's the same thing where they don't have a mental schematic to understand what they've just experienced. So it's like, okay, well, I think I saw Jesus, or I did see, there was this being of light. And it's interesting to me that those types of experiences usually only happen in essentially it's the early stages of the conscious mind or awareness shifting into what we would call like the spirit world, or the afterlife. Right. So there's that layer of like...
So there's subjectivity still is what you're saying, and maybe less later on in their near-death experience, if they have an extended one, there's more what we could possibly call objectivity.
There is. And if you look at the, for example, like the Michael Newton Institute and Michael Newton's hypnotic regression research, I think they've, in 2019, around about then, they estimated they'd regressed about 50,000 people from around the world.
Wow.
All walks of life. And when they go into the deep theta state, they bypass all of the religious programming, all the bullshit, and they basically, everybody in that state has the same experience. So what does that tell you?
What are some of the common threads?
Well, people experience leaving their bodies. They experience going like often up or into a tunnel or a light, and going back to being greeted by friends and family on the other side. They experience a happy reunion. All this kind of thing. So like, it's always positive. It's always, there are exceptions for people who are like severely traumatized, or someone who's severely deviant and criminal. They have a different, they go into like a
life review that's probably pretty traumatic, or like a hell state period.
Yeah.
It's interesting, not to go off on a huge tangent. When I interviewed, we're going off on so many tangents. I love it. That's just how I do my show. But when I interviewed Vinnie Tolman, for those that are interested and haven't watched or listened to that episode yet, I'll put it in the show notes as well. That was episode 4, I believe, of The Way Forward. When I interviewed him, he described seeing outside of the, quote, gates of heaven, of which you needed to embody a certain frequency to even enter, these little like white orbs that looked like what he thought were pearly gates. It almost looked like pearly gates. And there's these white orbs outside of the, quote, gates of heaven, right? And in these orbs, he was able to peer into one, and he saw this guy who was working off a bunch of his trauma and karma, where he was a figure that looked like he was in the 1920s or 30s, dressed that way, Italian-American, just yelling, and Vinny was able to perceive that he was yelling at his son, angry, just angry, and then finally got to a point where he was done with that, and then realized where he was, and then entered into the gates of heaven. So it was like him working off his karma to be able to come into this density in order to move into that realm.
Yeah. That's more or less on point. Like that's basically, what happens. So your state of consciousness dictates what kind of conscious experience is available to you.
Yeah.
And so if someone's in a state where they're like that guy, then you, by definition, you can't enter into a state of outrageous bliss, because you are in a state of the complete polar opposite. So people need to stop thinking about it in terms of like you're taking a trip somewhere in the car, like driving to a different geographical location. It's an alteration of consciousness. So you're not necessarily moving through space at all, although there is a spatial aspect to it, but it's that transition. So there's a process, and there's an esoteric aspect to this as well, where, we have to go through a process of the body is decomposing. The etheric body, which is a duplicate, also known as the vitality body or pranic body, that is decomposing as well. Dr. Krukel, Robert Krukel, did very interesting research, which I've dug into a lot in my book too, because it's fascinating, where he found that mediums and people who had NDEs and other types of this type of experience had a certain kind of proclivity or tendency of the etheric body to be a little more loose, a little more like a medium's etheric body can be lent out and worked with by other beings much more easily.
Wow, interesting.
And that type of personality was someone who, when they had a near-death experience, or like a journey to the other world, they would have to go through this Hades, hellish kind of like realm, which again it's all perception in consciousness. It's not an actual realm, but they experience certain things. And he realized, and I support him, and I have to applaud him on this because I haven't seen anyone else who's figured it out, but he realized that this was the process of essentially shifting your awareness from the etheric physical level through the etheric barrier into the astral proper sort of afterlife realms. Wow. So you have this journey through, people would characterize it in different ways, like they would cross an ocean, or they would have to go down a riverbank with high sides on it, or they would go through this dark passage or tunnel. Often it was water-based imagery, and the etheric body is itself a very watery kind of particularly in a medium, someone of that constitution. So he noticed this pattern, and so that is another factor in separating your awareness from your body, as well as the astral level. And so there's all this stuff that we have to process. It's not simply bang and we're in this through the pearly gates in heaven. Like it's nowhere near as simple as, you know, the exoteric religious.
It's a
concepts.
Traveling not in terms of distance or of time, but in terms of densities and being able to come into the right frequency to be able to place yourself in that density, if you will. Exactly.
So yeah, we can call it, you know, it's been called paradise. It's been called, you know, the higher subplanes of the astral realm. Then you have the mental planes, which are more blissful, again, and much more expansive.
What traditions do these come from?
You get this in, like, this is Hindu and Buddhism, and then Theosophy took a lot of these concepts. And what's most interesting and compelling to me about this stuff is not that somebody had the idea, it's that people have been able to test it and experience it. Yeah. That's the key. It's empirically based. So it's not, I'm not interested in taking something as an idea and just clinging to it dogmatically. It's, if somebody has seen and experienced something, I want to know what's going on. And so we have so many correlations between different people from different walks of life saying the same types of things. It's very interesting. But
and you're talking about like almost mapping the realms, if you will, or the bodies.
Yeah, exactly. That's part of what book 2 is. Yeah.
Can you touch on that a little bit more? So I know you mentioned them briefly, but can you expand on the different astral realms and the different bodies as much as you can recall?
Yeah, I mean, okay. So the astral typically is referred to as like the emotional body. This is that's the first layer or level. So you let go of the physical body. Most people, from what I've gathered, most people have a fairly easy transition into the, let's just call it the astral world. They will often, you know, probably one of the best ways to die is to die peacefully in your sleep, because you sleep through it, for one thing. So there's absolutely no stress, no trauma, no worry, no fear. And then you wake up with typically somebody who is already on the other side from your family, you know, spouse, whoever, there with you. Like,
you're not stuck. And I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I have to ask a question. Is this when we talk about souls getting stuck, like let's say someone who purchases a home from the 1920s, they keep on seeing the same figure who's a traumatized figure that's a mom looking for her daughter. That's an example of someone who's stuck in the astral and not able to move on. And this is just a soul who's able to perceive them via tapping into the ether to some degree.
Yeah, that's actually a can of worms in itself, because you can
try not to open up too.
It's like here's a can. I know,
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I can't help myself, because these are all like thoughts that I have all the time. Like, I wonder if that's what makes sense of this.
Yeah, I mean, and some of that I think is like essentially an echo or an akashic record playing out over and over. And certain types of people are more prone to tapping into the field in that way. Like more intuitive types will see this kind of thing. But then it could be also, you could say, well, maybe it's one of the aspects of the lower mind that has been shared by the soul, or the ego is the esoteric term. The ego has moved on, but in the process of doing that, you have to shed the lower vehicles.
Got it.
Like you have to shed the physical, the etheric, the astral, the lower mental. And so that could be maybe the remnant of that human being that is mechanically behaving as they were used to behaving in their life.
Got it.
And at some point,
it's like just an energy imprint that is staying in that location, because that's where they're primarily housed.
Because it's essentially a mindless automaton.
Got it.
The true consciousness, the center of consciousness, has left the building. Yeah. So the building is kind of running on autopilot, going through the motions.
Got it.
And so that's another possible explanation of these types of things. So
we
could go. This is like, we're going to become a tangent fest.
Okay, so we have the physical, and then we have the astral, which is synonymous with the emotional.
Yeah.
Okay, and then above that is...
And then you have, esoterically speaking, you're talking about the mental plane. So you're going into the lower mental. These are called the heaven realms, or the heaven. So it's funny because when people transition, and this happens in a lot of, I would suggest most near-death experiences occur when someone actually just arrives in some astral, we'll call it a subplane of the astral. So somewhere in there, and they're usually blown away by how blissful it is, how expansive it is, how good they feel. There's somebody there to greet them. It's amazing to me, I'll say this, it's amazing to me the archetype of the field of wheat, how many people find themselves standing in a field of wheat or grass, tall grass, or laying in tall grass?
Vinny described seeing grass. Yeah.
There you go.
And described that there is this sound that is, you can't describe in our terms, coming off of the grass, that as he was describing it to me on the podcast, he started crying just thinking of the grass and that realm.
Right, because it's like, what reality is made of is more obvious in those realms.
Yeah.
Like here, it seems like it's all nuts and bolts and concrete, but there it's more obvious that everything is made of sound and light.
Yeah.
And so, people are just like blissed out. They like, I can't believe how good life is. And all of a sudden, they're just in paradise. But that's just like the mid to upper astral. They haven't even tapped into what is regarded as heaven yet. They're not even there yet.
Wow.
So there's this, and every layer of this, we have to call them, nested spheres, because that's the esoteric tradition, and that's what they are to non-physical perception.
Okay.
So you have the etheric, which is a doppelganger of the earth, but it's a little bigger. So it encompasses the earth, but it's expanded. Okay. Then you have the astral, which is, again, expanded again. Then the mental is even more expanded. So I remember Charles Leadbeater, the Victorian era theosophist, and he was actually an Anglican bishop as well. And a lot of Christians hate this guy because he was... they have various reasons. Some, just a lot of them just simply not relevant to the work that we're talking about.
Right.
But because of the fact that he was, I'm pretty sure he was a Mason. He was a theosophist. He was a seer. He was clairvoyant. He was all these things. He was an initiate in at least a couple of mystery schools, but he knew what he was talking about because he could see. He had vision. And he talked about the astral earth doppelganger reaching out at its maximum. It was, what was it? I think it made it halfway to the moon or something like that. Mm-hmm. Something around about there. So that's just to give an idea of the size of. So in that, let's just say in that space of this non-physical dimension, because it's so much bigger, then you have this potentiality for a whole other ecosystem of intelligent entities, beings, creatures, critters, that can occupy this whole other ecosystem that's not physical at all. And same for the etheric doppelganger, again, in a whole other ecosystem. That's where a lot of alien contact, UFO sightings come from, the etheric level of like
we're talking
density.
about like the orb-based sightings rather than the physical like silver disc ones, right?
I'm gonna
because that phenomenon is a broad spectrum of
huge.
What we call UFO or UAP.
Yeah, and
right?
I wouldn't reduce like everything to that.
Yeah,
because I don't think you can. But I would suggest a lot of it, even some of the like the disc sort of stuff, the stuff that looks solid. Again, what is solidity?
That's a good point.
So it's all emptiness, as we know. So again, like it shouldn't be that outrageous of an idea that maybe some of that stuff is actually, it's not from a place far away. It's actually the etheric version of the earth that we are being visited from.
Yeah.
And sometimes more rarely the astral version of the earth as well. I'm not dismissing
do you
the rest.
think that some of these things, because we're all talking about it like being just based on frequency and light, is that they're just outside of what we can access in terms of the visible spectrum, but they're all around us at all times.
Yeah. And because they're not phase locked to us for the most part, so they're unaware of us, we're unaware of them. It's like being tuned to a different radio station.
Got it. Makes sense. Totally makes sense. Okay. Did we cover all the...
I think that's more or less, it gives the idea.
Okay.
Basic idea.
Good. If you're enjoying this episode, please consider sharing it with at least one friend or family member who you think could benefit from hearing it. You help us grow and reach more people by sharing it with those around you. Also, be sure to head to the show notes to check out our membership offerings, membership marketplace, and more. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Okay, so now that we've explored that and the different realms beyond this realm that we can readily perceive, I want to touch on something that has come up quite a bit in the truth community. And it's this idea that we're living on a prison planet controlled by archons. Some say it's a prison simulation, that reincarnation is real, but it's a trap that they try to trick you into. And the way to get out of the trap is that when you go, like, you're not supposed to go towards the light, you're supposed to avoid going towards the light. Some of these ideas that are shared by Heidi Mikowski, David Icke, and some other people. And many will claim that it comes from like Gnostic traditions. I just love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know you wrote an article recently, which I'll link in the show notes, on the reincarnation soul trap psyop. Yeah,
it was that was a pretty basic article, but I just had one of those moments of I just need to say something about this. This is ridiculous. Right. But I mean, I'll start by saying David Icke's fundamental message is the same as mine. His message is we are infinite consciousness.
And so is Heidi Mikowski's, by the way. And cool. that's the thing that they say, is that we are infinite consciousness, but we're being tricked into staying in this hellish realm, which, yeah, I don't think it's a hellish realm.
I mean, you know, I'm open to any idea. It's just, is it being presented from a place of evidence? Is it being presented from a place of logic? Can it be worked into a cohesive whole, an idea? And, you know, I've obviously spent the last 20 years essentially, before that even became an idea in the popular consciousness, I was already researching it. So I already knew that it was incorrect, but it's amazing to see the idea gain momentum. And again, you know, it ties in with simulation theory, because a lot of people do tie it in, right? So you mentioned that, and that is, so the simulation theory idea, it's like we've just come out of, you got to kind of pull out a little bit and look at a slightly bigger picture. Like, we've just come out of centuries of like gross materialism. Like, consciousness doesn't exist. It's been positivistic, deterministic, Newtonian. We've just eliminated the soul as much as possible for centuries. And we're coming out of that, like this deep amnesia that we've been so immersed in. And what were the dominant ideas before that? Well, they were exoteric, illogical, religious ideas. So we've transitioned into then hardcore, like reductionist scientific ideas. And they're nonsense as well if you carry them far enough. The worldview is incorrect. But to come back to the Gnostic thread and the idea of a simulation, we are recovering from the amnesia and recovering from the idea that this reality is the only reality that exists. So it's like the germinal concept of there's some other thing beyond this reality has taken root, but it's kind of it's manifesting and being expressed in some pretty awkward and clunky ways. Like, again, we're trying to recover from amnesia. We are in a process of what Philip Dick would call anamnesis, so the opposite of amnesia.
Wow.
the process of remembering.
Yeah.
And so, but in the process, we are like a little kid, you know, learning how to play with his blocks, and he tries to build a tower and the blocks fall down because he can't line them up right. You know, like that's the formation of ideas process that we're going through at the moment. And the simulation theory is kind of like a step in the right direction. And if you don't do like the extreme stupid end of that spectrum, then you're moving in the right direction. Like the dumb end of that spectrum is, well, we're literally in a computer.
Yeah, I hate that.
Literally in a software program, like literally. Right. And that's not, again,
like when people say simulation and they say it in the context of like some cosmic simulation that we are all taking part in co-creating, I can buy that. It depends on the context in which they mean simulation.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, you know, part of the reason like that they even entertain that idea, the computer electronic kind of idea, is because we are in the electronic age.
Right.
So that informs our thinking.
Yeah. And we see how AI is continuing to evolve. So then we immediately presuppose, well, if this is where this is possibly headed, then how do we know we're not already in one ourselves right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you end up with the infinite regress sort of situation where we're like, we're in a simulation, we'll never get out kind of thing. Like, spare me, please. I mean, this is not helping anybody. It's disempowering. It comes from a victimhood mentality because you are, whether you like it or not, by adopting that idea, let's just say there was evidence for it, but there's really very, very little, especially when you connect the dots, right? But it's fundamentally disempowering. So you're making yourself a victim. As soon as you adopt it, you're like, I'm a victim of my circumstance. I'm a victim of creation. I'm a victim of the creator, apparently, who has abandoned me here in this hellhole. And of course, obviously, you and I both know that life on Earth is inherently challenging. It's very, very few people.
It's supposed to be, though.
It's supposed to be. And this is the thing, right? Like, it is supposed to be. And that's a whole other aspect of this question. And we are here fundamentally because of choice. I mean, if you start at the starting point of this mystery, the mystery of consciousness, of reality, the source of reality, which we really can say very little about. I mean, I've experienced infinity. I've touched infinity. And I don't know very many other people who have. And so I'm not saying I've got all the answers. I'm not even saying that was the most infinite of infinities. Like, I don't know how vast the vastness gets. Right. But even from where I stand, I mean, it's a matter of free will choice. Because the mystery that creates cannot be limited. It cannot be constrained. It can't be victimized. It is everything that ever was or will be or could be. And reality is just infinite possibility, infinitely manifest. And there's actually, I think, an aspect of the source field, if you want to call it the source field or creator, that means it can't not create, and it can't not create everything that's possible to create. So I just think we're just this tiny little blip in an ocean of infinite creation. You know, probably infinite Alex, infinite Brennan, and all the rest of the stuff, like the omniverse times infinity. So we choose to be here. Fundamentally, there's some kind of a choice at a very germinal level that we can't even comprehend. But even when you get to the level of like the monad and the causal body and the higher self, then it's obvious that it's free will choice. It's obvious that we're here because that part of us, not the ego mind in the skin encapsulated ego, not this level of us, but that part of us outside of the space-time matrix chose to experience the space-time matrix. It's pretty basic. It's very obvious. Describe
what you were sharing with me in the car on the ride over here of that one near-death experience.
Yeah. So case in point is that one, because out of all the evidence you could marshal, that one near-death experience, multiple. I mean, so we're talking about a near-death experiencer who had 17 NDEs as a baby infant because she was born into a family of generational Satanists. And so she was tortured from the beginning of her life, basically. So what she learned, the nutshell version of her experience, or multiple experiences, she had 17 death experiences. She would be outside her body in the non-physical state. She would suddenly experience massive downloads of information, and she would get, every time, she would get more and more information about who she really is, what she's really doing here, why she's here. And she learned that she made a choice from that non-physical realm on the other side of the veil to incarnate into that specific family with the mission of interrupting the pattern, like the generational abuse. And she talked about trying to, I'm getting emotional just talking about it, like to spark the heart. So And that's like, that's a huge sacrifice, but, you know, free will choice behind it. Like, she lived a horrible life for years, years, because she chose to, because that was a path of compassion for people who were on their way to becoming very, very unfortunate souls. Like, we're talking lost souls, because that in itself is a, I would suggest, certainly from an esoteric perspective, and I've found modern evidence to support it, that if you're deviant enough, you can actually put yourself into like an evolutionary cul-de-sac where you will essentially cease to exist. Like that, at that level of expression, the personality will eventually evaporate. It will run out of steam.
And she sees the true nature of who they are from this non-physical realm, and then looks at, I need to do what I can to bring healing into this situation, and also to stop it from occurring for future generations of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, shit, from that level, like, that's a very Christ-like sacrifice.
Right.
You know, like, this is the thing, all these things you shall do and more. And so that was the lesson that she got from dying 17 times, was she chose to be here for that purpose.
Yeah.
And that is essentially the learning of basically anybody, virtually anybody who has actually had a genuine NDE, or an esotericist who has the ability to consciously, intentionally explore the non-physical realms and connect with those other aspects of the fractal self, you know, the higher self and all this. It's the same outcome. You know, Michael Newton's research into theta state hypnotic regressions, it's the same verdict over and over again. It doesn't matter how you slice it. It's free will choice to be here. We just don't always like the results of being here. It's not always fun. It's not always enjoyable.
Especially when we forget, and it's a weird, like, intentional forgetting. But then for those of us who begin to remember, then start to forget again, it's like, fuck, like, I'm not going to lie, dude. There's times, you know, I've been sharing like how many projects I'm doing right now. There's times like, fuck, this life sucks right now. And then I get to a place of a couple hours or a few days later, I'm like, wow, one, I'm glad that I experienced that feeling of suck right now at that point in time, because I know that there's always, it's what Kelly Brogan said when I recently interviewed her. She said something to the effect of that, it might have been Beth Martins, Kelly or Beth, I interviewed them back to back, but one of them said that this traumatic experience, that is the gift to more freedom. Like any of these traumatic or tough or challenging experiences, if you just understand what they are there for, they serve you to feel more deepening of freedom and love, and, you know, all of these so-called positive expression points. But yeah, I think that when you have that to fall back on, you understand that we are here for a reason, and sometimes we just forget what that reason is. But I love this reality, man. I do. And I just don't believe that we're trapped here. The other thing that people who subscribe to the idea that there's a reincarnation soul trap will say is that, well, it doesn't make sense for us to forget our past lives if Earth is this playground that we're here to learn things, right? Like, why would we then be programmed to forget our previous lifetimes and things like this? And there's this quote that I'm going to paraphrase from this book called The Red Lion, which is one of the best books on alchemy I've ever come across, where he is someone who does remember all of his past lives. And he describes that it is challenging enough for an individual to remember the trauma just in one lifetime. Imagine remembering vividly everything that was done to you and everything that you did to someone else in previous lifetimes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it would, if you could access that, you would also be able to access other information that would interfere with what you're doing. Like, you would interfere with, you would be able to, you would have foreknowledge. You would, okay, like for example, just as an example, right? I mean, esoterically speaking, all the stuff that happens to you that you don't like is generally considered to be, it's like a balancing of your so-called karma. Karma is a Sanskrit word for work. It doesn't mean what most people think it means. But it's just it doesn't look like it makes sense from where we're standing from, because we're standing at the bottom of a very large mountain and we can't see the summit. Like, we're just like, there's like clouds here blocking the view, and like the veil on the other side of that, you know, there's a whole other infinity of information and perspective. But as an example, like, we got ripped off by one of our landlords in Mexico. The first landlord we had, And we found out, we knew that this is kind of a scam they run. Sometimes some of the Mexican landlords will not return your bond money. Man. And we knew that happened, but we didn't, in our situation, we didn't have any reason to believe that it would happen with this particular guy until it was too late. And we found out that, yeah, we were getting screwed. So if I had access to all that information from my past lives, then we would be talking about the causal, esoterically, the causal level of perspective, which is where you have access to past lives. And if you have that, then you know why your landlord is about to rip you off. But then you would not want to experience that, because who wants to be ripped off? So of course, then you're going to dodge it, but you need to experience that because that is part of your growth cycle in this lifetime. Right. So if you have, it's like, if you can see a little bit more of the bigger picture, it doesn't make sense. That objection itself doesn't make sense. Right. Because there is a rhyme and a reason. There is a scheme to it. There is an intention to it. And from our puny little linear space-time kind of perception, we just can't grasp it. We can't see it. And the process of entering into the space-time system, it naturally, and Bruce Moen explains it in a certain way in his books, and I talk about it in mine because it's relevant to the work, about it's a process of like condensation and restriction of the consciousness of the soul as it enters into this system. And it has to happen because there is so much background noise here as well, like just from the human mind and human emotional body constantly radiating all this thought energy and emotional energy noise out, that if we could actually keep our, if you like, our normal soul level kind of expanded perception, that noise would just destroy us. Like we wouldn't be able to function here. So it has a constructive purpose. It has a basic survival function so that we can live our life and do what we're supposed to be doing here. So there's that aspect of it as well. So like, I don't like the fact that, you know, I don't remember past lives and stuff. Like I'd like to have little snippets and things to see how it all ties together. Because there's, again, at that level, that higher level, everything is correlated meaningfully and it's all happening simultaneously. So it's not really anything happening linearly. It just seems like it.
And it's just because we don't understand it, that doesn't mean it's ridiculous or it's not true.
Right. I mean, quantum physics and non-locality and entanglement seemed outrageous when they were discovered. But now we just simply have to grapple with the fact that's how it works.
The other thing with the reincarnation soul trap that comes up quite a bit for me is that as we're waking up, those of us who are waking up, let's say, to the reality that we're to some degree in some sort of spectrum able to co-create this reality. Some people would say that we have literal total full control, like Jason Bashir's Archaics. That's kind of what he indicates. And I tend to play along those lines, versus we have some little bit of control and there's like an objective reality that is created by you know, a supreme being that is not nefarious necessarily, but a supreme being that is all loving, that we can play within that spectrum. I guess maybe I kind of dance back and forth between the two. I really do. But the point is that if that is the case, that we're co-creating this experience and we're buying into this disempowering belief that this is a reincarnation soul trap, slave planet controlled by archons, as some say, then we're actually helping to co-create that experience, ironically. And we're co-creating the experience of our, quote, entrapment, quote, enslavement. So that's the other thing that really bothers me about it.
Yeah. So firstly, on an individual level, obviously, you're adopting a victim mindset right off the bat. Like, that's undeniable. So how, I would ask anyone who is attached to that, why are you attached to it? How is that serving you? Is that improving your life? Is that improving your experience? Are you happier? Are you more fulfilled? Are you less angry or more angry? Because from what I've seen, it's probably more angry. All that stuff. So there is a lot of what happens in the truth movement is based around the emotional reaction of realization of deception and the manipulation. People are pissed off, and it feels like, yeah, because life is hard, well, then it's easy to adopt the idea we're in a trap. I don't know exactly what Bashir says about the level of influence that we have, but you know, one of the points of book one was to demonstrate that even an individual has the ability to manipulate reality. Sometimes if they are especially talented on an unbelievable scale, like the Indonesian girl, right?
Can you go into that a little bit? Because that was incredible to read about that.
So yeah, thanks to Lyle Watson, the late biologist. So he as a, oh man, what's the word? Why am I blanking on this? He was someone who studies culture, anthropologist, thank you. I don't know why, I have the worst timing for mental blanks. Anyway, so he was an anthropologist as well as biologist, and he did a lot of touring and travel, and he spent quite a bit of time in Indonesia, with the local tribes, villages, and spending like learning their lives how they operated and their customs and traditions and beliefs. And one of the interesting people he ran across was this girl called Tia, and she was a girl. She was only young. I forget the exact age, but she was young. But she was also one of the shamanic sort of types. She was one of these medium mystic, clairvoyant types. She had what the Hindu tradition would call the siddhis. So she had these activated superpowers. And one day, Watson was out exploring. He was just taking a walk, and he stumbled upon Tia nearby in an olive grove. And she was with a younger girl, a little girl. And they were doing something weird. Tia was kind of like making strange gestures with her hands. And after a while, the trees, the olive groves, so multiple trees, right? She's standing in an olive grove. It's not just one tree, it's multiple trees. Enough to create shade and stand in the shade and all this. And so at some point she's doing these gestures, and then all of the olive trees in the grove are not there anymore. And they've just vanished. And then the little girl who's seeing this, she's freaking out. She's excited. She's like jumping up and down and dancing around like she can't believe what she's just witnessed. And Watson can't believe what he's just witnessed, because he's not only just seen the olive trees disappear, but the little girl's reaction shows that something very, very weird has just happened. And so she's seeing essentially the same thing. So Tia then does some more sort of gesturing and what have you, and she makes the trees reappear. And so now they're back again. And she repeats the procedure several times, right? So biologist Lyle Watson is just losing his shit at this point. He just can't understand what he's seeing. Right. And that just kind of broke him on some level. Like it just
how can it not? Especially like if I'm sure at some level maybe he's seeking in direction of some esoteric like metaphysical phenomena, whatever. But even if you are like seeing something like, dude, for me, I believed in the idea that kids can read blindfolded. Like I already believed in that. And then I witnessed it happen in person with not one, but two kids, even taking a piece of paper, covering up my phone so that they had both the eye mask on and the piece of paper to peer through, and were able to read every word on my phone. They're playing catch with each other. We would pretend to throw the t-shirt at them. They would react as if they could see without having their eyes able to see, like they had the mask on. And again, I already believed in that, but seeing it in person is a whole separate thing. It changes your life when you see it in person. Yeah.
And I will say, I know those two kids.
Yeah.
I get to hang out with them. So
you get to see it every day.
Well, not every day, but yeah. I mean,
what's so interesting though, when I'm not going to name names, but at one point, the younger one, I won't say his name, was struggling a bit to read some of the stuff. And he had been doing it for like 40 minutes now, because everyone at this event is like, oh, like really interested in what he's doing. But his mom kind of nudged him, was like, you haven't been practicing as much. And he took the eye mask off and rolled his eyes and then walked away. Yeah. And what she revealed to me, and I'm paraphrasing here, is that this is so innate to him that it's not special anymore, that it's just like whatever. It's just like talking or speaking another language or riding a bike, that it's really not that big of a deal at this point. Yep. And of course she emphasizes, as does my friend, Dr. Edith, whose kids can also do the same exact thing, that this is something that all children can learn up to a certain point. I would say roughly age 12 through 13. That's what both of them say. But the point is that it's not necessarily special. It's that it's uncommon, that we all have these abilities. Some might have a proclivity to do them a little bit better than others do. Just like I might be able to jump higher than other people, or some people might be stronger than other people or more well-spoken, same type of thing. But we all have the ability to do these seemingly paranormal or psychic-esque things. This
is it. I mean, you bent a spoon.
Yeah,
I've seen the spoon. Yeah, I mean, it's like, so this is it. It's like, okay, well, why is it uncommon?
Right.
I mean, you can be trained. Right. You can be trained in one day to do that.
Totally.
And like we know, Major General Stubblebine, I mentioned this in the book. He died a few years back, but he was teaching the military guys about this stuff. And they would have classes, and all of a sudden, all these military guys are bending spoons. Like it's doable, but we've forgotten so deeply who and what we really are.
Right.
And then we've shrouded the mystery in stupid exoteric religious dogmas that make no sense and are not valid. So we've created fear and stigma around these basic things. These are innate human abilities. And I forgot where I was going to go with that, but
well, go back to the Tia thing because so
Okay.
this biologist, he sees this happening in person. Sorry, I went off on a tangent because
No.
I was sharing my experience of seeing something.
It's funny, I wanted to say something, but I started with the tangent, so there you go.
That's just what we do. We're going to title this episode "Tangents" with Gordon Murphy.
Welcome to the Tangent Show. So yeah, Tia was like this extraordinary. Like she was showing an ability that is not common, but also most people will not, even if they train for it, they won't probably be able to get that level of talent, because that, from an esoteric perspective, you could talk about it from a past life point of view and say, well, she's had other lifetimes where these types of skills have been worked on and developed. Which is why, you know, you have kids come into the world and play, you know, the hardest pieces on piano at the age of 4, and we're like, well, how does that happen? And there are other ways of looking at that. I'm just sharing the linear view of reincarnation.
Totally.
So Lyle Watson, and Tia was just shit. That was like a turning point for him. That just blew his mind completely. And so, I don't know where you want to go.
No, that's okay. I want to share what that book is called. So that he covers that in a book, Lyle Watson. It's called Gifts of Unknown Things, A True Story of Nature, Healing, and Initiation from Indonesia's Dancing Island. But the point here is that these seemingly crazy experiences aren't all that crazy when you understand the nature of reality, and like you said, Brendan, who and what we truly are. And that ties directly into the segue for the topic that I'm super stoked to discuss.
And can I jump in with one thing before you do?
Yes, please.
Because one of the things is, and before we go there, and like a great subject, and I love the hat.
Thank you. Again, the hat it says swimming in ether. So.
Yes, which we are.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the paranormal, and like a significant amount of the information I deal with in well, the first 2 books really would be called by some people paranormal. But I went to pains to point out in the first book that you can't go to the shops and purchase a 6-pack of paranormal. Why? Because it's a concept in the mind. It's just a category in your mind. It's not actually mapped out anywhere in reality. Like, I've got a microphone here that is a real physical entity as far as the reference frame of real physical world goes. This is real. I can touch it. I can go and buy one at a shop. I can't touch the paranormal. I can't go and buy it at a shop. I can't download it from a cloud. Like, it's a mind category. And so when we're obsessed with categorizing things in our minds, you know, based on our indoctrination or experience and conditioning, you immediately place a huge block in the way of understanding a lot of things. So it's really an unhelpful concept, but it's a word we have to use sometimes.
Agree. Very, very well said. Okay, so where to start with ether? Because I'll just start where I'm at. When it comes to theoretical physics and quantum physics, I'm very turned off by it. Although I will say that I also acknowledge that these fields of study, we can garner good information from them, but really they're just pointing back to things that a lot of occult and esoteric traditions have been talking about for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and now claiming that they've, quote, discovered it scientifically. Some of it tends to get off on some absolute nonsense, in my opinion. But with that being said, what quantum physics might refer to as dark matter or the quantum field, when, for me, I recontextualize that as ether, which I found, I don't want to say necessarily through Eileen. I'll say I was inspired by Eileen in her work to just look at the nature of the concentric rings of toroidal fields that reality exists within, sort of these like nested toroidal fields. And I started, I think it might have been Steve Young, who I'm interviewing here soon. Anyway, once I learned about ether, this idea that explains in a very real way this information field that we are swimming in that is all around us, it sort of contextualizes these, again, seemingly, quote, paranormal phenomena and makes them very real. It's like, no, these people are able to tap into and manipulate the ether that is all around us at all times, even when it comes to various psychic phenomena.
Yeah.
It's their ability to access or tap into some aspect of the ether. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because you cover that in chapter 6 of The Grand Illusion, part 1.
Yeah. Okay. Where do we want to start?
Yeah. Just ether as it relates to the psychic phenomena. Just take what I said and go a little bit deeper.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, I've always found a useful analogy is, think of us as we're like fish in a fish tank or a pond or whatever, something you can view fish easily in. So a fish tank or a bowl. And the water in between us is the etheric medium. It's the ether. And so it is a very real connecting principle, but it's not like a material substance. It's actually the source of material substance, but it is what we could call a virtual substance. It's so like an inversion of our reality in a way. So the two fish in the fish tank can't see the ether, but it's there, and it's the thing that allows them to exist, and it's the thing that allows them to communicate. Maybe they want to have a telepathic conversation, and that's the medium through which the information is, if you like, if you take that view, exchanged. That gets a little tricky because from a quantum theoretical perspective, there's necessarily no sending and exchanging back and forth. It's just a non-local correlation. It happens instantaneously. But from an esoteric perspective, there are other layers and densities of the ether. Yeah. So that's generally not a concept people who popularize these ideas work with. But if you look at the work done by, certain types of seers, psychics like Charles Leadbeater, which I get into, he and Annie Besant, these Victorian era theosophists and psychics, were very interested in what atomic or subatomic matter was really, what it was at its foundation. So they clairvoyantly investigated. So there is a superpower. There is a city. It's called the power of, I think it was the power of magnification. I don't know what the Sanskrit word is at this point, but basically the ability to make really tiny things visible and look big.
Wow.
So you can analyze them. So it's essentially, or you can think of it as reducing your consciousness to an incredibly tiny scale. To
be able to see things at a micro or sub-micro level, essentially.
And so that's what they...
Did they find any viruses?
They couldn't find one. It's a mystery, isn't it? Because I just see them everywhere.
I had to.
That was good. Dude, every time on my podcast, if I get a chance to do something like with the virus thing, I'm like, I'm the same. I did it with the Bigglesons. I was like, and you guys don't work with viruses at all?
Especially because you hang out with Adam pretty frequently, so you just had to.
I could just palpably sense Josh's reluctance to go there.
Oh man, that's good.
So it's like, it was not part of our paradigm, and move on. Anyway, so what they didn't find was viruses, and what they did find was all they could identify. So going to the roots of matter, what we think of as solid matter, what they could find was these tiny, tiny, unbelievably small vortexes, just essentially mini tornadoes.
Is that etheric spiral dynamics? Is that what that leads to?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the only reason I know that term, you just made a surprise face like, wow, you know about it? I know it because of you, dude. So.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I might need a refresher on this. So yeah, I think Eileen, I don't know if I remember, I don't want to put words in Eileen's mouth, but I think I might have put her onto the ether stuff or something.
Okay, possibly.
I think she dug it anyway. She dug that anyway. Cool. Thanks, Eileen. Shout out. She's always a good ally to have.
Absolutely.
She's also an awesome human.
Yep.
So they found that matter is just these swirling vortices, and it's swirling in the etheric medium. But it challenges our ideas of how things work, because the matter, the particles, so-called solid particles that we, quantum scientists in general have thought have been they were originally pictured as like little billiard balls and, bouncing off each other. But they found
very
there was
materialistic,
totally Newtonian. And it doesn't look like that to clairvoyant vision. And they're not the only people who've done this investigation either. There are others. I think Edwin Babbitt did it before them. And I'm pretty sure some Buddhists and other psychics have done it through the ages. But essentially mini tornadoes. And what it is if we go back to the analogy of the fish in the fish tank and the water, it's the water of the tank spinning at an unbelievably high speed. So it's incredibly high frequency rotation. And what you do, if you get a glass of water and you put a spoon in it and spin it around and you make a vortex, well, what's in the center of the vortex?
Not water.
Exactly. So it's nothing.
Yeah.
The core, the roots of matter is actually emptiness. It's nothing.
Oh, that's so crazy.
And so and Einstein was onto it as well. He understood that. He knew that emptiness was matter, and
but he also gave up on the ether. But then I found in your book he was quoted as saying, I'm going to read this quote because perfect segue there. In theoretical physics, we cannot get along without the ether, i.e. a continuum assigned physical properties, because the general theory of relativity excludes direct long-range action, and each theory of short-range action assumes the presence of a continuous fields and consequently the existence of the ether.
Right, so he eventually changed his mind and realized that getting rid of the ether was a bad idea. Like he understood, as have a lot of other scientists who generally go unrecognized, that you have to have some kind of substrate to account for the existence of what we think of as, you know, the material world. So it has to be there. There has to be a foundation. It's like, you know, it doesn't get created from nothing. But in a sense, it's kind of funny because the matter that is created from the field is nothing. And it's an inversion of the way we normally think about things. So
it's so crazy to think about.
It's wild. And so all matter is at an atomic structure or subatomic structure, and atomic and molecular is just the rearranging the formation of these little vortex points, these node points of just rotation, just spinning. Just that's all it is. It's just,
so it's like distortions in the etheric field.
It's totally just it's a geometric distortion in the field, and that's how you end up with geometry, and that's all the sacred geometry, and that's what, you know, you can segue into that stuff. That's for someone else like Ibrahim to talk about or whatever. Yeah. But that's the root of what's going on there. It's just emptiness rearranging itself into patterns, geometric patterns that then give birth to some sufficient scale, something that the human body can detect, you know, the frequency waves of it being put out, and it seems like it's solid matter, but it's not.
Wow, that's incredible. And so back to the ether sort of spin dynamics as it relates to particles, I want to touch on this a little bit more because I've talked with several people about this, including Jordan Grant. It's so funny that when modern, quote, science can't figure out the cause of a phenomenon, they just come up with some theoretical particle to explain said phenomenon. So in general, are you of the mindset that particles are really this just condensed spinning version of ether that appears as a particle because it's so condensed, but it's really just like, I don't want to say the collapsing of a waveform, but it's like if you're looking at an electrical line, right? And you take a snapshot of electricity moving across an electrical line with that 2D snapshot, it's going to look like there's a ball, an actual ball of light within that electrical line. You're just not understanding that this is electricity moving across a medium. So it's like a, quote, particle, an electron, quote, you see what I'm getting at, is literally just a condensed version of not material, but of energy in one space.
Yeah, exactly. That's all it is. Condensation of the field. It's a localized condensation of the etheric medium. And if you, say, withdraw the excitement from that region, if you withdraw the energy source, like let's just to use a term that I would normally not use, like the divine will behind it, then it will, you know, the vortex will wind down and it will just, it will release itself it will collapse and allow the ether to flow back into that space. So we will think there's nothing there, but there's actually an infinite source of energy there. That's what the etheric medium is. It's an infinite source of energy, and it's also, I would suggest, and I've said, you know, this may not come out quite right, but it is if you like, the background field of collective consciousness. So when we talk about free energy and people are tapping into the etheric medium, they're tapping into, you know, non-physical reality. They're tapping into the source field. They're tapping into consciousness. There's no limits to consciousness. It doesn't have a beginning. It doesn't have an ending, and neither does the etheric medium. It's this virtual reality world that is kind of uncreated in a way.
I love thinking about the ether as it relates to both Eileen's work and also Veda Austin's work, especially with the ability, as you know, and I think you're saying in the car that you might have been one of the first few people who Eileen did a virtual tune-up on. I know the original guy she did a tune-up on virtually because it was a doctor who requested that she do it, but you must have been one of the first few people after that. But that being able to tune someone's field virtually, and I've experienced it, you have too. I know for me, it was like, oh my goodness, it absolutely works. And I'm pretty in tune with something being placebo, nocebo, and in psychosomatics. I'd like to think that I am. Of course, there's going to be some elements of belief there at some level, of course.
I'm immune to...
yeah, totally. Yeah, me too.
I'm a
totally
truther. I'm immune to
I'm truther. Yeah. I'm totally immune. But my point is that when you put the ether in the context of that situation, like also putting the ether in the context of Veda Austin has done this countless times, where she or someone else will project their intention onto a glass of water that is 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 miles away, and what they projected onto it was able to show up. And then you also have the phenomenon of people meditating with a certain intention to lower crime rates in certain areas or things like this. And when you put the ether back in, it doesn't make it seem so mysterious. It's still mysterious because we can't see it occurring, but now that you know that there's an information field that we can all access if we attune ourselves properly, that we can transmit and receive information via various mechanisms through that ether, it all makes sense in the proper context now.
Yeah, exactly. And all of that phenomena, like all of that sort of non-local phenomena, you know, the different types of tests, the water, intention, all that stuff. I mean, it's been done hundreds and thousands of times. And, you know, the results of that are unequivocal. Like, there's no denying that the mind can influence things remotely. But, you know, part of the challenge is we're so used to thinking in this sort of atomized, reductionist way, like I'm over here and you're over there. But I think the ether helps people to at least move into a broader paradigm and a more comprehensive one, because now it's like, oh, well, there's something connecting us. At least there's something. And we're actually really, if you go back to the root of the mystery, the heart of creation, and then from there, everything is a projection of the one mind. Everything is inextricably linked because it's essentially the same thing. Everything is just, you're a manifestation of the same thing. I'm a manifestation of the same thing. You're the version we call Alec. I'm the version we call Brendan. Like, it's all the same thing, just imagining itself in different ways.
And for people who are struggling with that, though, again, ether puts it again in a context where it makes sense. It's like, oh, we are all swimming in the same field made up of the same things. So therefore we are all one at some level.
Yeah. And I had something to do with vortexes and the arrangement.
I'm sorry if I
it wasn't you. But yeah, it's like tangents.
It's you being in Mexico and not experiencing non-native electromagnetic fields that you experience now in Austin from being here for 2 days.
Bad to blame Austin.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know where you want to go from there.
No, you're good, man. You're good. I'm obsessed with it, and that's why I had this hat made. And it's because that it just makes things that appear abstract and theoretical and mysterious, and it puts them in a way that makes it very real. That's what it does for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we understand, like, that's the connecting medium, and that is what allows a transmission to instantaneously occur. So that's the thing with information, like from where physics is at now, information can do all the things that, you know, magic can do or the paranormal can do. So we can invoke information instead of using certain other terms, and understand that information is inherently, if you like, non-local. So it has no boundaries, it has no barriers, nothing can stop it. And you could substitute the word intention there. I mean, what is it, if we're all connected in the mind of God, in the etheric field, what is it that allows us to, I mean, why can, you know, your wife sense when you're coming home, but the guy down the street who's also connected to you doesn't know that you're coming home? Well, because why would he? It doesn't have any relevance to him. It means nothing to him. And that's, meaning is at the core of existence on any level. And my divine trinity, so to speak, my holy trinity, and I did a Substack on this, is consciousness, information, and meaning. And you can't talk about any one of those without invoking the other. If you're conscious that there's meaning present, it means something to be conscious. If you have a sense of meaning, you have to be conscious to have a sense of meaning. And information ties in with meaning, because information means something. So you've got this trinity here, and that's what the etheric medium facilitates, is the instantaneous transmission of an intention, so that I can send you a message, so to speak, telepathically or whatever, and we know that we are connected, but it's intention. So the guy down the street's not going to get the message, but you'll get it. And the etheric medium allows that, but it's my intention and choice to connect with you at a conscious level, so that it's not a subliminal thing, because we're all subliminally connected, but intention and meaning are key.
So cool thinking about this, man. And it just shows that we have a much greater impact on this reality than we've been led to believe. And I think about this in the context of where we're at in history right now, especially for what would ostensibly be much of the audience that listens to this show, relating to, quote, the truth community and the holistic health community, and being in such a tumultuous, chaotic time. We're in a selection, and I will not say election season. We're in a selection season again. And there are so many people who are so obsessively focused on what, quote, they are doing, and are so perpetually afraid. And I am of the mindset that if even just the relatively small number of people who comprise the truth community understood what you and I are talking about being able to co-create this experience, and took that to heart and actually put it into action, we could transform this reality like that. Literally at the snap of a finger. That's all it would take, is us becoming acutely aware of and dancing with our ability to co-create this experience and taking back control of our co-creative capacity.
100%. And it's just a choice. It's a choice. What gets in the way is people's conditioning and dogmatism and all that nonsense. But we could sit down like they did in the Maharishi experiments, which is in chapter 11, I think, of that one. And it only takes like the square root of 1% of a population to sit in coherence with each other with a common intention to eliminate crime from an entire city. I mean, that's wild. That's absolutely wild. So the square root of 1% of Austin could basically eliminate crime for as long as they sat there and meditated. Maybe there's probably a window of, before and after where the effect lasts, and would even precede the beginning of the experiment, which is interesting. But yeah, so the power that we have collectively is just ridiculous. It's huge, which is why it's so unhelpful when memes like the Soul Trap start gaining momentum, because then people are pumping massive amounts of psychic energy into that system, that belief system, or the selection season. And that's just an energy harvesting thing. It's like, and it's not necessarily driven consciously. It's most of what happens, even at the conspiracy level of things, not all, but most of it is unconsciously driven. It's just people just going through the motions, don't know what else to do with themselves, don't know any better, limited perspective. And I've gone off on tangent, but I was actually at a point there, but I think I wanted to come back to the Soul Trap thing, because on a non-physical level, like we're talking about the etheric medium, which is a non-physical realm, the virtual medium, we've been talking about all the different like density levels of it, the dimensions. If you have 1 million people or 10 million people around the world who have adopted the Soul Trap theology and ardently believe in it, they're creating a huge effect in the quantum field, for one thing, in the etheric medium. And at the same time, they are building at an astral level, they are building a corresponding dreamscape that is going to be, when someone peeks their head into it, so to speak, it's going to be the nightmare that they've been programming collectively, right. which circles back to hell experiences. And there are aspects to that, but that is partly what people do. And that's also what people do in the higher levels of the so-called afterlife, when they gather together in their religious communities, because they think that, their version of religion is reality and the only reality. And so like attracts like. All the people of birds of a feather flock together, right. and they all end up in the same place. And they're like, yeah, we made it. We're in heaven, man. Good stuff. You chose the right religion. What are the odds? And it's absurd. So, and then what happens in these afterlife dreamscapes that have been collectively created and unconsciously created is then other people who have a slightly broader perspective have to come and intervene somehow and work their way in to go, hey, actually, there's a little bit more that available to you, than what you realize, and you can't really stay here forever. You're not really supposed to be here. You
ain't got to go home, but you got to get the hell up out of here. Type of situation.
Right. You can go anywhere else. but I mean, this is it. Like we just hypnotize ourselves with these belief systems, and there's a corresponding psychological reality in the psychic realms. And this is part of where I think the soul trap meme comes from as well, is people having altered state experiences, but again, the contamination of doing it through an active nervous system, as opposed to like being physiologically dead. There's a filtering mechanism and an interference that is created by doing it, by the mind operating through the nervous system.
Yeah, it makes
essentially.
sense. That totally makes sense.
And so I think
there's still an association, like a deep association with the body in that case.
Yeah, and the inability to to essentially expand the awareness and go deeper. And so what people do, and I think what people have done is there's something that I refer to as the astral fantasia. So in the astral or the non-physical realm, the quantum field, whatever you want to call it, we create these virtual realities, these dreamscapes. And they seem real because at a psychological level, experience is reality, right? So we're like, oh my God, I experienced this thing, it must be real. Like I went to hell, or, I had a near-death experience and these demons came to take me away. But we have all sorts of ways of accounting for that and explaining that, without resorting to simplistic religious thinking, for example, or simplistic post-Gnostic truther idiocy with the soul trap nonsense. I mean, I don't mean to be judgmental. Like I know people are, figuring things out and on the journey and all that stuff, but there are realities we create unconsciously that can be tapped into, and the astral fantasia is one. I think of it as a bubble layer of the collective unconscious that we can tune into. So the collective,
is it like a thought form then, or is this separate of a thought form?
You can consider it a thought form reality.
An egregore? Okay, so like an egregore reality rather than an egregore entity.
Right, so like instead of a localized, like a thought form hanging around, like I think of a potato and a potato hangs around my head, like this is a whole, like we can create cities and worlds.
Got it.
All right, so it's just it's like a question of scale more than anything.
Got it, okay.
And much more.
Is it a question of scale and also a function of how many people are thinking about it then?
I would say that's very relevant.
Okay.
Yeah, very relevant.
Sense.
I mean, if you look at the last 2,000 years, Christianity, Catholicism, people have a tendency to, at least on some level, have experiences that fit into those beliefs because the dreamscapes already exist. Like, so what people don't grasp a lot of the time is that exists as an experiential reality in the non-physical world, whatever you want to call it, and you can go there and you can have an experience of it. Or you can have the issue of physiologically dying or having an out-of-body experience, but you have to work your way through the etheric body, which creates this weird kind of, it's a distortive lens. So you want to be on the astral side of the equation as opposed to sort of, because the etheric is part of the physical system, and it's kind of like trying to view reality through a cloud or a fog or a mist, which some people actually experience. This is part of the experience. So again, these contaminating factors, and if I view, say, for want of a better term, my spirit guide comes to me because I'm having a near-death experience, my body's stopped working, but I'm entangled in the etheric body, I might perceive them as a demon.
Yeah.
Or on the flip side of that, sometimes a guide or a friendly entity who knows that you're about to die or crossing over temporarily may go, oh, okay, well, here you come, and you've been a really unpleasant Christian dogmatist scaring people with fire and brimstone your whole life, so I'm going to scare you just to give you a taste of your own medicine. And they might temporarily show up looking demonic just to make a point, Right. So there's all these different things that are possible and might happen, and might be the thing that explains somebody's experience. But, if you go into the afterlife stuff with Newton, nobody finds a devil, nobody finds Jesus, nobody finds the Christian concept of God. It's much, much more nuanced and subtle and much more expansive than that.
Do you think that demons then on some level are actual individual entities, like you said in this case, that this benevolent being appeared to be demonic or acted demonic in a way to give this individual taste their own medicine? Or is it that, I mean, you could say that that's tied to some karmic implications for that individual as an example, but what I'm getting at is there's other schools of thought that would say these demons are fundamentally a creation of your own mind, which really ties into being somewhat of the same with what I just said before, but they're quite literally a creation of your own mind based on your own karma that you have not worked through in your inability to truly forgive yourself or forgive others.
I think it can be like that absolutely that, as well as maybe some other possibilities. Like William Baldwin, I think was his name. Sorry, Baldwin was definitely, yeah, William Baldwin. He was doing regression work with people as well, and he would find attached entities sometimes. He would take people into past lives and stuff. And a lot of the demonic entities that they found hanging around people turned out to just be people, like a human soul that has left the body and is suffering from being a disturbed kind of personality. Like,
wow. So
this is the thing. Again, like you're in a non-physical realm that where your thoughts and your state of consciousness are reflected in your appearance. And Jürgen Ziewe talks about a guy who he came across who was covered in, like, his whole body was just covered in these weeping sores. Again, he's astrally exploring, right, in the non-physical realm. And he's covered in weeping sores. And he realized, you know, without going through the rest of the story, he realized this was because of the shame that he was carrying, guilt and shame. And it was eating him. There was one guy, and I'm not sure if it was from Ziewe or maybe Bruce Moen or somebody, but one of those guys who had an encounter with somebody who had maggots eating them. And every time they would, like, you know, the maggots would finish eating their leg would regenerate because it's just a thought form, like in the astral realm. So, you know, you can't.
What's so interesting about that, though, is it relates to what happens in this reality. Maybe a little bit more graphic and a little bit more disturbing.
Totally.
But that a lot of our physical symptoms are a manifestation of our own undealt with emotional psychosomatic stuff.
Totally, totally. I mean, that's what, I mean, if you eliminate toxic exposure, what's left? Like, we create our own illness.
Right.
It's much more obvious in the non-physical dimensions, but because it takes time for it here, right? Like Dora Kunz was a psychic who looked at somebody's astral body, and she found there was like a 20-year time lag in one instance between the emotional dysfunction and the manifestation of a corresponding physical symptom. So it was a psychosomatic disease. But of course, she's not going to realize that because there's a 20-year time lag between the event that traumatizes her and the time that the symptoms show up. This is one of the major problems that we've got in medicine and health in general. Like, people can't connect the two dots because there's a time lag.
Yeah. I love that as it relates to what happened over the last 2.5 years. And that's kind of, well, 3.5 years now, almost 4.
Yeah.
No, it's been 4 years.
Yeah.
It's 2012. Oh my God, dude. Wow. I forget how long I've been saying 3.5 years and 2.5 years. Wow, it's 4 years now, almost 4.5.
It's 2048. And 3 years ago. Yeah.
But we were laughing earlier because we brought up like being immune to psychosomatic stuff, and it's because we were having a conversation in the car earlier where there are some people who are certain that there must have been a bioweapon that came from a lab because they are impervious to any psychosomatic stuff, and they know for certain that they couldn't possibly be programmed. So the only way they could possibly experience any of these uncharacteristic symptoms like loss of taste and smell and things like this are because there must have been a man-made particle floating about.
So it's interesting because hypnotizing yourself into a state of trance where you think you're immune to all forms of psyop would lull you into a state of complacency, and that's not helpful. So you want to be vigilant. As soon as you are...
Are you immune to psyops, Brendan?
Obviously. You know, I wrote The Grand Illusion, so...
You must be. No, but the point is, like, even he and I willfully admit that we're not immune to freaking psyops, dude. And I think because we admit we're not immune to psyops, we therefore are able to work through psyops more easily.
Because you're vigilant and you're not complacent. If you're complacent, you're already losing.
Right.
Like, and the thing with, you know, the recent psyop of the last 4 years is that the foundational programming, or psyop, was contagion. It was materialistic medicine. Right. The programming was already there, and so that's the schematic people are interpreting events and information through. So when they see something on the TV, or their neighbor tells them that they took a test and it was a positive and whatever, they've already been brainwashed into a completely false reality.
Right.
So everything that they interpret from that point on is coming through that distorted lens. And what's the inevitable outcome of that? Of course, you're going to drop the ball. You're going to be deceived. You're going to be duped.
Well, and especially as we see in the example, the number of examples where people, when gathered, all focusing on the same thing, help to create more of it for better and for worse, or help to change an outcome for better and for worse. When we're doing it unconsciously, meaning that the media and the government puts out certain information that they want us to collectively manifest. We are unaware of our co-creative capacity to create a certain experience. We are then unwittingly creating more of that experience, making it real, making it appeal real in reality. That's what happens.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, I think a lot of people are at the point where they can understand that their belief system determines how they interpret reality and how they experience it, or at least perceptually. But some people still haven't caught on to the fact that your belief system actually manifests physically.
Dude, this makes me so fired up because when people message me as I'm sharing my musings related to, let's say, voluntarism and just like knocking down the belief system in authority or knocking down the belief system in the allopathic medical paradigm, so many people are like, well, what's your solution? Like they want actionable steps. I'm like, what leads to action? Thoughts, feelings, and beliefs at the least lead to action. And as you're saying, they actually manifest or come into being in reality. So the most important thing is to change your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, to bring them into harmony, into coherence. And then from there, I don't know what is the appropriate solution for you. Once you are bringing your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs into coherence, then you will come up with the appropriate solution for yourself.
Exactly. And you won't be looking at Alec.
Yeah, you won't be looking at me
to solve
like,
the problem.
What's the solution? You
help
solve
me,
it,
help
Alec.
me, man.
Right.
You know, like I'm an empowered truther. Help me. What do I do? No,
Right.
no. That's right. So like, and it's indisputable that nocebo effect is real. I mean, scientific research on this, you know, Roitas covers it in his book.
Incredibly.
One of the very famous cases I put in there, you know, 12 years ago. This guy who had this cancer drug, this experimental cancer drug, and he was taking it. I don't know if you've spoke about. Did you already talk to Roitas about this particular
Not
thing?
the experimental cancer drug.
Okay.
I touched on it. I brought up that there are experimental cancer drugs and some psychosomatic things, et cetera, et cetera. So,
okay. So
placebo, nocebo effect.
So his case is great because it actually is nocebo and placebo at the same time.
Incredible.
And he alternates between them according to his belief system. Wow. And the doctors are just programming him. They realized what happened was this guy's got severe cancer, like he's in a dire situation, and they're like, okay, so here's an experimental thing, you know, seems promising, you know, and so he was full of hope and optimistic, and so he gets the dose, and his tumors start shrinking and just disappearing throughout his body, and then he, you know, this I'm simplifying a bit, but then he finds out that actually it's not as effective as initially thought. And so, guess what? Overnight, his cancers just flourish and blossom, come back like even worse than he was before, like basically overnight. And then the doctors realize what's happening because the information that they'd initially given him was incorrect, and they realize he's having like placebo and nocebo effects. So they start to tell him, you know, they give him like a saline solution and go, okay, so we've got a new and improved version of this experimental drug. Here, give it a try. And of course, all his cancer disappears, basically almost cured.
Just saline.
Yeah, from nothing other than the power of suggestion.
Right.
And then he hears like a news article, something on TV or whatever, saying, oh, this experimental drug is a bust. It's not going to work. And guess what happened? Shortly after, you know, his hopes just crushed. His spirit is crushed. Shortly after, he's dead.
Oh,
Cancer came back and he died. Now that is placebo effect, nocebo, placebo, nocebo. He's a one-man proof. I mean, we've got plenty of other proof, but he illustrates it so vividly, this poor guy. And it was because he didn't grasp the power of his mind, the power of his belief system. I mean, if a little Indonesian girl can make a friggin' olive grove, like garden, disappear in broad daylight, do you not think your beliefs and feelings might have a slight influence on your own friggin' body? Hello.
Right, exactly. Another thing that I want to circle back to relates to something that I put a tab on for later, and I do remember, thank goodness, is the sort of new age belief systems that are like perpetually waiting on us to ascend and waiting for aliens to come rescue us and things like this. And it seems to be just a flip on like dogmatic religious beliefs. And that's one piece of it. But then because of that, a lot of people are, quote, waking up to the problems with those who subscribe to new age belief systems, and are now turning back to fundamentalist religion. And I tend to look at myself as like a naturalist, if anything, or like very interested in just esoteric mystery school, like occult traditions. And I know people.
Well, that is absolutely like a naturalist essentially perspective.
Right.
You strip away the stupid woo and stigma and superstition.
Right.
It's what
exactly.
it's a study of nature.
Yeah, exactly. But then, well, I was rolling my eyes because then people be like, "Oh, so he must like be a Freemason." I'm like, you don't get it. You do not get it.
It's actually swimming in ether. If you rearrange the letters, it actually says,
right,
yeah.
dude, right. The moment you say occult, some people is like just like hair stands up in the back of their occult. You talking about like Freemasons and stuff? I'm like, no, dude, you don't get it. You don't get it. No. But anyway, so you see this trend towards where people are waking up, sort of thinking that some of the things that you and I are talking about that do relate to these occult, like esoteric lineages that go back thousands and thousands of years, and then obviously like Eastern traditions that go back thousands and thousands of years, they'll look at some of these things and say, oh, these are new age, and they'll dip their toe in it for a little bit, or they'll dip their toe in or go full in and then go down these new age, like alien, just absolutely nonsensical threads within that, and then they'll go back to fundamentalist Christianity.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Firstly, it's obvious that someone who's doing like following that kind of a path or pattern is they don't know who they are. They don't have a center. They're constantly looking for the external solution. It's like the servo mechanism. Oh, I'll try this for a bit. Oh no, that didn't work. I'll go over here. Oh, that didn't work. I'll go over here. Because they don't have a center. Like they've abandoned themselves already for whatever reason. So at that point, you're susceptible to just about any bullshit. Really, like that's the first on an individual level. So I think on a sociological level, it's interesting because there is, as we were just saying, while you're changing the batteries, there's this weird kind of like resurgence of like fundamentalist Christianity. And I'm not like, my job is not to sit here and bash people for believing something like, and that's something believers struggle with. People who frame their entire reality in terms of belief cannot relate to someone who has left belief behind and has like a gnosis or insight, whatever. But anyway, that's a tangent. So on a sociological level, I think there's something interesting going on because we are in such a time of uncertainty and transition. The established order is kind of falling apart. People don't know what's going to happen next. They are traumatized. They're in fear. For valid reasons. Like this is not a this is not a criticism at all. And a lot of people will find their way to Jesus, Isus or Yehoshua in the Hebrew, through just hitting absolute rock bottom. And firstly, that is a solution if you don't have your center, if you don't know who you are susceptible to any of these.
You're not even saying that that's necessarily wrong given the context of that point
I'm just
in time.
saying it's completely understandable.
Right.
It's just, it's the mentality behind it is different. Like you and I are seekers of truth. And like, if you're like me, I'm ruthless. Like I don't give a shit what the truth is.
Right.
Like I'm willing to discard everything.
Dude, yes.
That
100%.
Doesn't make sense.
Right.
If it can't.
Even if it flips my whole paradigm upside down.
Yeah.
Same.
And like I was destroyed by Michael Talbot's book back 20 years ago. And so that's why we're here having this conversation.
Right.
Like, thank God I was destroyed by that book. Like, otherwise my life would be shit. I'd be working a dead-end job, probably going home to hang myself. Like, it would just be like
horrible.
Thank God for the
and now you're 40 years old and you look like you're 18 because you're.
It's all the Botox, mate. so yeah, we're tangenting again.
Sorry, yeah,
that's all good. But yeah, so it's understandable. Like, it's an understandable trauma response to want to find comfort in something. And to want to bypass the uncertainty because that's uncomfortable. Like not knowing produces as kind of like a neurotic discomfort that people want to eliminate. Like it's completely understandable. We want to avoid pain and go towards pleasure. So the Freudian idea ties into this as well. Like avoiding pain, going towards pleasure. We want to get rid of uncertainty, the discomfort of not knowing. My line of research has taken me into the vast infinity of not knowing. And knowing a little bit at the same time. Like, at least I found my center, if nothing else. If I'm wrong about everything else, I found the true nature, as far as I can tell, of reality and the self and consciousness, and it's all the same thing. It's infinity, infinite consciousness. That's the bedrock of reality. People who don't have the center are very easily swayed by whatever breeze kicks up. And the trauma response is obviously you want to feel better. You want something that makes you feel better. It's why a junkie goes and gets their next hit. You want to feel better. It's not that you want to be addicted to the drug. It's not that you want to ruin your life or whatever. You just want to feel better somehow. And so I've noticed the pattern that most people who are, you know, like say in the last, say, 10 years or whatever, just as a grown-ass adult who find Jesus are usually doing it after hitting absolute rock bottom in their life. Like they've just, it's fallen apart and they don't know where to turn. And then, of course, of course you would want someone to help you, to come and pick you up, take you under their wing, give you a hug, rescue you. Like you want to be rescued. So the rescuer, Jesus embodies on one level the rescuer archetype to the nth degree, because he's literally, according to salvationist theology, he is literally the rescuer of humanity. So billions of people. Like he's the ultimate rescuer. Now, we've already mentioned that's a fraudulent idea, but of course, so on an archetypal level, at a very deep-seated level, the inner wounded child is very drawn to that. That's a surrogate parent figure as well. So you're like, this is, if someone's broken down sufficiently, they will do just about anything, turn to just about anything. And it's just that, you know, we happen to live in a like most of the people we're exposed to or we see are in the same kind of like English-speaking world. It's the religious backdrop is Christianity. So that, of course, where do they end up? They end up in Christianity, born-again Christians. So that all kind of makes sense too. But when you work in like the esoteric side of it, like the information field that we're all swimming in, every belief you have manifests as a thought form in the thought form levels of the astral plane, and at the mental level, if there's an intellect content to the thought, it will manifest at the mental level as well. If it's just emotional or sensory desire based, it's just an astral thought form, but it's a thought form. Now, if you put thousands of people together or millions of people together who believe in the same thing and visualize internally the same kind of world or this other world or the gates of heaven or heaven, Jesus, whatever, the throne of God, they create that experience, and the belief system becomes something you can actually experientially visit and go to, as Robert Monroe, Bruce Moen, and many other people, Jürgen Ziewer, all these people who've gone and visited heaven realms made by Christians in the afterlife realms.
Wow.
But going back to the information field, we can't just think of it as an inert, passive information field. It's also the home of the, if you like, the emotional impetus behind a belief or behind a belief system, and the emotional impetus that sustains a thought form. And it is in itself the belief system on an abstract kind of informational level. You can think of it as an entity, as a thought form. And this is what, I mean, nobody talks about this as far as I can see, at least not publicly, because you're not supposed to criticize religion. But let's just talk about what might possibly be happening. Let's just talk about reality and how it works. So at the quantum field level of the information system, you have a being, essentially, like an artificial elemental of incredible power to influence. And this is where the only valid virus exists. It's in the mind. The mind virus is the only valid virus. And so you have this entity that is now created. It's sustained by human emotion. This is, this ties into other things that people becoming more popular, but, often very distorted. So it is an entitized belief system. Mm-hmm. It's not just an intellectual idea. It exists as something that wants to continue existing, like a virus, so to speak. And so its idea, as far as it is concerned, its survival is ensured by propagating to the next mind and propagating to the next mind.
It's the concept of Wetiko, essentially.
It is. And like Wetiko fits into all this. Like, yeah. Absolutely. So you have this so-called mind virus that has to survive. Obviously, there's a basic survival drive behind anything that exists, really. Even the material that is, makes up the camera tripod has a tendency to stick together, to want to stick together and preserve itself. And consciousness exists at absolutely every scale of existence. So it's, we have to talk about this stuff. And so people then become influenced if they are, again, not in their center, if they're vulnerable, if they are, not informed in certain ways, they'll be vulnerable to their mind virus then propagating towards them, because the systems, the information systems in the quantum field, or as Vadium Zeeland calls it, the alternative space.
Wait, is that coming from reality transurfing?
Yeah.
Dude, I love that book.
Great book. And he gets it. Like he gets it. If you want to, the best explanation of so-called law of attraction is that book, reality transurfing. Because he strips away the bullshit and he understands like the informational level of it.
Yeah.
And this is what people don't realize is every belief system is kind of looking for a home in somebody's mind. and it's going to try and find its way into yours. Like, that's one of the challenges with these legacy belief systems, is that they are so enduring. They have been fed by so many people. So much emotion has been poured into these things, and they are very strong. They are very influential. Someone who doesn't know who they are, you are going to be chewed up and spat out.
Right. Wow. Wow. Man. There's so many places that I want to go with this, but dude, I don't want to make this 3.5 hours. Okay. The last question that I have for you is a big one. And I'm sure you've thought about this quite a bit, though. Why are we here? Like, what is the... What is...
You had to go there.
I'm sorry. Well, I just want to pick your brain on that, because I know you have to have thought about this with all that you've written, all that you're exploring in both versions of your book. Why are we here? What is the point?
You know, like the mystics and the esotericists will refer to the creator as like the mystery, the great mystery. So from that level, who the hell knows? Mm-hmm. It's a mystery. You're not supposed to know. Like,
right.
The human...
And that's being comfortable in not knowing again, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you know, like, hey, a lot of people I know don't want to know. They don't want to go there at all.
Right.
But as far as I can tell, we are the result of... It's almost funny. It's like the creator doesn't have free will. It has to create. And it has to create infinitely. It has to create. Every potentiality has to be manifest somewhere and experienced somewhere. And the mystery of its own creations has to be explored and experienced, which means more creations. Like, imagine it imagines a world and a universe into being, and then it's like, you know, at that level, like, this is obviously a kind of simplistic childlike way of explaining it, but like, the creator, the intelligence behind everything is like, it is able to manifest a world, the physical universe, let's call it, and then it can manifest an etheric universe. It actually happens in the reverse order esoterically, because the physical world is the, you know, the so-called fallen world is actually the result of the preceding non-physical world. But it has no choice as far as I can see. And like, if you read, you know, say Joseph Campbell, he talks about all the different, you know, mythological traditions and stuff, and one of the statues that he mentioned that he found in one of the cultures, I think probably from the East, obviously, was a goddess that was crying, like the crying god or goddess. And it's like, well, why is God crying? How could God possibly be upset? And it's like, well, fuck. It created everything. It created all the suffering. It created all the joy. It created the entire spectrum. And it knows that it, like, as it, you know, watches the creation, it knows that its participants, the holographic fragments, projections of itself, are going to suffer for the experience, to have the experience, so that it's not a mystery anymore. So the creation is not a mystery anymore. Mm. So on that level, it's like God had to create, had no choice, ironically, you know, created a free will experience for everybody, but I don't see it as having an option, because
it has always been, so it will always be. Exactly right. At that level, there's no change that can be made. Yeah. It's all in a sense. So what else? If you were an infinite being existing everywhere and you couldn't go anywhere, I mean, what would you do? I'd feel kind of lonely. Right. I'd want to create like fragmented versions of myself that forget who and what they are, that I can interact with.
Well said.
Seriously, though, like, I've thought about that quite a bit too, because I'm like, dang, if I was like by myself, I only could create, right, as you're saying, and I would feel lonely, and I would feel lonely of experiencing all this just bliss, this total bliss. It would become, it would take the depth of the bliss sort of out of the equation, if you will, because it's like, that's all I know. Yep. So I would need to create fractured versions of myself that don't remember who and what they truly are to some spectrum, some degree, that do go into the darker emotions to give context for how beautiful the beautiful ones are.
Yep. Yeah, so we have, you know, the occasional avatar or whatever who, you know, just has a little bit more awareness or self-awareness and memory. But that's it. That's more or less how I see it. Like, I don't see it that we are supposed to be stuck in this kind of, you know, and it's the problem is using words to talk about this stuff is just ridiculous, right? So everything I say has to come with like a little asterisk next to it, and you know, all that. So disclaimer, but we're not supposed to be in bliss, like stuck in this blissed out kind of stagnant in quote marks kind of place or state indefinitely. And if you look at, again, the esoteric traditions, they are vast. Like their concept of reality is so far beyond even like the simulation theory people. Like they're at kindergarten level. Like these guys, the esotericists, have these vast concepts of time and creations of universe, like manifestation, and then the unmanifestation, the out-breath, and then the in-breath of existence, like existence itself, and you know, the night and the day and the rest period of like key essence and quietness. And this is where we're in whatever it is, the bliss, the unknown, the something that we can't even really talk about. And then we have the out-breath of creation and duality and the relativity and absolutely, like they talk about things in terms of cycles of just this going on eternally, because how can it not? You know, at the level of the creator, the mystery, there is no time whatsoever. But I don't see how the creator has any choice other than to create. And it has to create an experience of lesserness because it's already the fullness.
Right.
So how can it do anything else other than create these tiny little creations that it views as its children, like lovingly, but it's like, you know, you send your kid off to school and you're like, there's a part of you that's like, oh, fuck. Like, I hope they're going to be okay. I hope they don't fall over, or hope someone doesn't bully them, or it's like the same thing. It's the same principle. Like this is where you get the statue of the crying God. It's like, it has to create, it had no choice, but it's witnessing with compassion the creation. Beautiful.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Man, this has been such an awesome conversation. I want you to touch on real quick your program, Evolve Yourself, which we have a link to in the show notes.
Cool. Yeah. So I do a little bit of work. This will probably be the last year I take new people on for this, but this is like it's not a program as such. It is. We call it a program, but it doesn't involve like doing work and homework and stuff. It's
You're not programming people to create egregores or anything.
It's actually a front for a Freemasonic organization. Yeah, you got me.
I had to. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We do a little organ harvesting on the side.
All right, what is it? What is it? Involve Yourself.
It's a transformationally oriented thing. So like, we work with sound. I work with sound, and we do there are 3 core, like kind of initiatory experiences that we do. Each one is spaced out over a timeline. This is explained in the link. Like it's a link to a free webinar people can check out if they're interested in this. It's like, so it's a transformational form of what we would call sound healing, but it has definitely an evolutionary kind of a thrust to it. So, you know, I used it on myself like a long time ago, and you know, it helped me to kind of move my life in the right direction. And there's a physical level aspect to it. You know, it addresses the physical, the non-physical, the astral, mental, and the spiritual level. So it's kind of a comprehensive, holistic kind of a healing modality that creates a process in the body that runs on its own kind of intelligence in the background. And that's a simple way to explain it, but in the webinar, kind of we get into it a little bit more. So if people are looking for that kind of experience, yeah, check it out.
Awesome. Man, thank you so much for joining me, Brendan. This was such a fun conversation.
Been amazing, dude. Thank you for having me. Awesome.
Yeah.